Hello. If you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
I work with a volunteer search and rescue team in northern Montana. Most of the time we're responding to injuries, lost hikers, the usual, but last week we found a man barefoot, half frozen, and covered in blood stumbling down a trail we haven't used in decades. We thought he was a missing hunter. He wasn't. We brought him back to base camp. He wouldn't tell us his name, just kept muttering, "It let me go. It let me go," over and over like a prayer. He hadn't eaten in days. We offered food. He refused. When we insisted, he screamed, said it would know. Later, while the others were out on a call, I sat with him alone, and he started to talk. He said he was part of a 3-man group hunting elk deep in the wilderness. Said one night something found their camp. Not a bear, not a wolf, something tall, thin, bones stretched over skin, teeth like needles. He never called it a name, but I did. I asked, "A Wendigo?" He flinched when I said it. "No," he whispered, "the Wendigo." He said it didn't kill them right away. It took them one at a time, always at night, always when they were alone. It took Tom first, left only his tongue. Then it dragged off Caleb. He said he heard Caleb laughing as it took him, but it wasn't Caleb's laugh. By the 3rd night he was alone. He ran, got lost, starved, heard it whispering to him. Not words, just thoughts, promises. He said he saw it watching him while he slept, said it left bits of his friends in the snow like breadcrumbs, and then it let him go, just like that. He said it stood over him at dawn, mouthful of Caleb's face, and whispered inside his mind, "You're already mine." I didn't know what to say. He looked at me with eyes that hadn't blinked in hours and said, "You don't get it, it's not out there anymore." Then he pointed at his chest. "It's in here." I didn't sleep after that conversation. He just sat there in the infirmary cot, staring at the wall, not moving, not blinking, like the thought of rest no longer applied to whatever was left of him. The next morning he was gone. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. The med tent zipper was still latched from the inside, but the inside of the cot was wet, not blood, not sweat, just wet, like something cold had melted there overnight. We followed tracks as far as we could, but the snowfall had buried most of them, just a trail of smeared boot prints that veered off the marked paths and disappeared into the timberline. That night I was posted at the south edge of base camp, forest edge, quiet, too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling something was just behind the tree line, watching, not moving, just waiting for me to move first. At some point past midnight, I heard footsteps behind the mess tent. I went to check it out and found 2 things. 1, a chunk of raw venison missing from the storage cooler. It hadn't been sliced or bitten, it had been scraped apart, nails maybe, something dull and rough. 2, a trail of footprints in the snow, barefoot. They led about 20 yards into the woods before they stopped, like the person who made them had either taken flight or vanished into the tree trunks. We logged it, set motion cams, increased watch shifts. But 2 nights later, one of the volunteers went missing. We found what was left of him scattered across a tree like someone had hung clothes to dry. Rib cage split and hollow, tongue left whole, eyes gone. The cameras caught nothing but static between 1:13 and 1:21 a.m. And somewhere in that static, on a single frozen frame, we saw something tall, standing just outside the infrared range, and a few feet in front of it, him, the survivor, smiling, mouth open wider than I thought possible, shoulders hunched like he'd grown something underneath the skin that didn't fit right. We shut down the camp the next day. I stayed behind to help collect the equipment. Last one out, just me and the trees. I don't know why I opened the meat locker before I left. Curiosity maybe, or something closer to instinct. He was inside, not hiding, just crouched in the corner, naked, hands raw, skin torn at the fingertips like claws were trying to push their way out. His mouth was moving, not speaking, chewing. I didn't move. He looked up at me just for a second, and I swear he said something, but I didn't hear it with my ears. It was in my bones. "You don't have to run anymore." Then he vanished. No sound, just gone. I still don't know how, but every night since I hear something at my window. It doesn't knock, it just breathes, and sometimes I catch myself breathing with it. The corpse was missing its face. It's an epidemic around here, a bad habit this town has with its murder-suicides. It's not enough for somebody to shove a knife through a rib cage and suck back on a 12 gauge anymore. No, now everybody has to be original, unique. They've got to peel off their victim's face, then scarf it down like skin jerky before slashing their throats. Do you know how long it takes to bleed out after cutting your carotid artery? Not long, 30 seconds maybe, a minute if you're really unlucky. That's not a lot of time to stage an arrest, to interrogate a murderer, to figure out why they killed their lover, their parents, their best friend. It's not much time to parse through the mental quagmire that compels an individual to carve off a face and swallow it whole. It just isn't. So I've had to make do. I've spent the last month digging through old case files and buried corpses. I've studied the local folklore and researched nearby legends. I've run a social media scan for sightings of anything supernatural, eerie, or otherwise insane within a 30-mile radius, all to figure out what might be causing these cannibal suicides. And you know what I managed to find? Nothing. Nada. Zilch. Until tonight, see, I've had a breakthrough, and it even has a name. Jonah. 17 years old, bright, studious, captain of the football team, head of the debate club, chair of the student council for human rights and class valedictorian. Not just a good kid, but the kind that universities fight over. 4 days ago, he murdered his father, tore off the man's face and chased it down with a glass of ginger ale, then cut his own throat and dropped dead beside him. Or at least that was the plan. Unfortunately, as fantastic as Jonah was at everything else in life, he wasn't much when it came to suicide. Lacked follow-through, you might say. The kid didn't sever his jugular so much as dramatically nick it, deep enough to pass out from blood loss, but shallow enough that the paramedics were able to salvage his life. And that was a mistake, because now he's all mine. I've never cared much for hospitals. It's a combination of the sterile fluorescence and the way the air smells like chemical warfare. The way everywhere you look it's either more clutter or abject emptiness. Maybe that's why Jonah looks so unnerved when he sees me. It's my expression, bitter, repulsed. But it's hard not to feel this way. Hospitals make me think of my sister, and my sister makes me think of... Who are you? Jonah croaks. His voice sounds like he spent the evening gargling razor blades. He's lying in the bed like a mummy, bandages strangling his throat. I close the door behind me, lock it. He asks the question again. It sounds even more painful the second time around. I still don't answer. We haven't reached that stage in our relationship yet. Instead, I cross the room, unbutton my jacket, and drape it over the chair by his bed. Then I take a seat. All the while, he's staring at me like I'm a hallucination, like nothing about me makes sense. Understandable. From Jonah's perspective, it's 10 in the evening. A stranger just walked into his hospital room wearing a black suit and a scowl, carrying the kind of briefcase that screams bad news. He probably thinks I'm here to audit his health insurance. That, or snatch his kidneys. But I've got worse things on my mind. I open my briefcase, shuffle through a handful of documents before finding my clipboard. The form attached is a standard 34-3A interrogation report, useful when determining an individual's involvement in supernatural violence. My pen clicks, scribbles Jonah's name up top. He tries to speak again, only manages to wheeze. My pen keeps scratching. I note the size of his pupils, his tangled brown hair, the way the corner of his mouth twitches in tune with his mounting dread. Then I fill in a dozen other fields, boilerplate crap that's too dull to describe. Age, location. Are you with... Jonah winces. It probably feels like throwing up asphalt every time he speaks. He pushes through anyway. Are you with the police? I pause, look up from my report and meet his eyes, just to let him know I see him, to let him know I hear him. Then I go back to the clipboard. Here's the secret nobody tells you about conversations. It's not about what you say, but what you don't. The only thing more agonizing than being spoken to is being ignored. And right on schedule, Jonah starts to break. He lurches up in his bed, stiff and sore, confused, hits the call button for his nurse once, twice. Then he starts hammering it. Only nobody's coming because I'm good at my job. Like I said, Jonah's all mine. He tries to shout, but it's so weak, so hoarse. Barely a rasp. Nurse, hello. The boy genius finally realized I'm not supposed to be here. Good for him. I scratch out the last of his tombstone data, then clear my throat. His gaze swivels to me. The nurse isn't coming, I tell him, clicking my pen and sliding it into my shirt. She went home early, so did security. It's just you and me tonight. Jonah's eyes are buzzing, his mind blue screening as he tries to calculate just who I am and what I'm doing here. I already told the detectives everything I know, he says. I'm aware. I'm here to ask you some questions of my own. Why? Who are you exactly? I loosen the tie around my collar. Suffice it to say that I work for an organization that's taken an interest in your situation. It's a private enterprise, off the books. We call ourselves the Order of Alice. He gives me a blank stare. I've never heard of it. That's the idea. So then you're not a cop? The way he says the words is like he wants to believe them but can't. I lean forward, cutting my voice to a whisper. No, kid, I'm an inquisitor. The guy you call when the monster under your bed needs to be euthanized. Jonah's heart monitor slows. I just told the kid that monsters are real, that our whole reality is a carefully constructed sham, and instead of panicking, he's breathing a sigh of relief. I'd call that unusual. A cough rattles from my throat. Wet, nasty, the kind that sounds like I'm not just spitting up phlegm but years of my life. I could only be so lucky. What are you looking for? Jonah asks, watching me fish in my jacket. I pull out a pack of cigarettes, slip one between my lips. Medicine. For a second, the kid looks like he might tell me you can't smoke in here, like he might try his hand at a lecture. Then he spots the gun at my hip and thinks better of it. Like I said, a smart cookie. You told the cops that you didn't murder your father, I mumble, lighting the cigarette. You said it was someone else, something else, correct? He nods, or as close as he can manage with all the gauze around his neck. Is that why you're here? You actually believe me? His voice is 2 parts hopeful, 1 part desperate. It probably doesn't feel great to have your whole community think you murdered your father and ate his face. Sure, I tell him, I believe you. He falls back on his pillows, relieved. Thank God, nobody else does. The way the detectives were talking sounded like they were angling for first-degree murder. Life in prison sort of thing. Relax, you're not going to prison. You think they'll acquit me? I laugh. Not on purpose, Scout's honor. It's just that I can't help myself. Hell no, if the state had the death penalty, you'd skip the line 3 times over. Another drag, another storm cloud. Then why did you just tell me that you won't end up in prison because by the end of tonight you won't exist? The implication hangs in the air like a guillotine. The kid shrinks. His arms wrap around himself, protective, horrified. He probably thinks I'm talking about the monster coming for reprisals. He'd be half right. You're innocent, I tell him. Same as all the other murder-suicides. Like you, they were victims. Just an audience to their nightmares, no different than my sister. He blinks. Christ, there goes my motor mouth. What happened to your sister? He asks. Same thing that happened to you, only she didn't botch the suicide. I heave a sigh, ashing my cigarette onto the floor. That's why I'm so interested in your case, I guess. I'd like to know the name of the monster that did this to you, that did this to her. His eyes unfocus with a sort of detached dread that makes the 1,000-yard stare look nearsighted. I'm sorry, he whispers. I can't tell you its name. Sure you can. He shakes his head. No, you don't understand. All of this started the second I learned that thing's name. If I speak it, if you hear it, then it'll come for me next. I lean forward to look him in the eyes. I'm counting on it. He recoils, a quiet horror about him. You make it sound like you want to die. Maybe I do. I crush the smoke on the armrest. Hack another cough. This one's got a bit of blood with the phlegm. Lovely. Or maybe I don't get a say in the matter. Is it leukemia? I tell him. Stage 4. Doc figures I've got another year in me, assuming I kick the habit. A few months if I don't. You can do the math on that yourself. His gaze turns downward. My mother died of leukemia. It's an awful disease. It is, but when it nets me this kind of emotional buy-in, it's at least useful. I glance at the clock on the wall. It's 10:35 p.m. That means it's time to pick up the pace. Listen, I'm not looking for sympathy, kid. I'm telling you I know the stakes. I'm dead whether I like it or not, so there's nothing you're protecting me from. Jonah shifts in his blankets like there's something eating him inside. It's not just about protecting you, he sputters. This thing doesn't just make you kill yourself, it makes you kill. I already know that. What I need from you is its name. He sucks back a breath, grimacing. He's having a crisis of conscience, battling his morals. He doesn't think I know what I'm getting into, that he can save me some suffering if only he keeps his big mouth shut. But I don't have time for heroics. Jonah, you have the chance to save lives here, to prove your innocence. Right now, your father died for nothing. Tell me that name and I can make his death count for something. And there it is, the final twist of the knife. Like most young men, Jonah can't help but want to do good by his father, to chase that validation even while daddy's buried 6 feet in the dirt. His eyes find mine, haunted, hollow. Okay, he says. Then his lips start to move and each syllable sounds sweeter than the last. He gives me what I've been searching for, the monster that destroyed my family, that stole my sister. He gives me the key to unlock the gates of hell, and it's called Zipperjaw. I scratch it down on my clipboard and haphazard scrawl, and sure enough, the name vanishes as soon as the ink forms. That's a bullseye, a bingo. I smile like a maniac. Can't help it. 30 years. That's how long I've been searching for my sister's reaper. It's what led me to join up with the Order of Alice in the first place. But after so many dead ends, I'd all but given up hope. But now that I've got one foot in the grave, it's finally shown itself, here of all places. It's almost like it lured me, pulled me back for one last dance before I closed my book for good. My hand, my whole arm is shaking, tremoring. I'm afraid. How long has it been since the last time I was truly, honestly afraid? Oh God, Jonah mutters, burying his face in his hands. I shouldn't have done that. I glance up, my smile fracturing. You seem like a good person, he says, his voice breaking. I really shouldn't have done that. The kid's really gonna turn on the waterworks and ruin the moment here? It's fine, I tell him. I already told you I'm a dead man walking regardless. But Jonah lowers his hands, takes an ugly breath. You don't get it, he says weakly. Once you know its name, Zipperjaw doesn't just kill you. It finds the person you care most about and forces you to slaughter them. Just like, it made you kill your father. He looks up at me, nods. The look in his eyes is so honest to God guilty. He feels awful, terrible. He's probably imagining my kids dying, or my parents, or grandparents, or a childhood friend. He's probably imagining Zipperjaw forcing me to kill some innocent bystander, just like it forced him to kill his old man, and it's tearing him up inside. I'm a monster, he whimpers, gripping a fistful of his hair. No, you're a good kid. If there's a monster here, Jonah, it's me. He blinks through a sheet of tears. He doesn't understand, not yet, but he will. I'm a difficult person, I tell him, anger, bitter. Most women are smart enough to avoid me, which means I haven't got any kids, no spouse. My parents were abusive enough that if my sister hadn't beaten me to the punch, I'd have probably killed them myself. Jonah's eyes soften, guilt fading into sympathy and horror. I know, I'm trauma dumping. I've never really figured out the trick to following social norms, to understanding conversational boundaries. I gnaw my lip, fingers dancing on the armrest. My therapist calls it sociopathy, or maybe it was psychopathy. It's hard to remember. Haven't got the DSM handy to compare. Jonah's eyes start to narrow. Piece by piece, the puzzle is forming in his mind. The point I'm trying to make is that I don't have attachments to things, not in the way you do. The closest I come to feeling a sense of connection is probably through my work. I chuckle, shaking my head. You might say I'm married to my job. Jonah swallows. What are you trying to say? Zipperjaw killed my sister, I tell him, an absent smile carving a path across my face. The only person I ever truly cared about. And now, there's nothing I cherish more than the thought of ripping it to pieces, and the only way I get to do that is through you, Jonah. That means I need your story. It means I need to know what happened the night you ate your father's face. I need all of it, every last detail. The heart monitor starts to scream. Jonah tries to lurch from his bed, but I shoot from my seat, shove him back down. Let me go, he rasps. Get off. Like I said, a smart cookie. He's finally pieced it together, recognizing the nightmare unfolding before him. Only I can't risk any miscommunication, not while midnight is just an hour away, and Zipperjaw with it. I press my finger against his jugular. Not hard, just hard enough that he stops fighting and starts cooperating. You get it now, don't you? He's shaking like cornered livestock. His eyes dart to the clock on the wall, 11:12 p.m. It's you, I say quietly, inches from his ear. Right now, nobody in the entire world is more important to me than you are, Jonah. He tenses. It's all crashing down on him now, the horror of what he's done, of what I've done to him. It wasn't personal, it's just that I need him motivated, focused. I need a surefire way to push him past his trauma and get to the core of his experience. That means he has to have some skin in the game. You prick, he spits, voice dripping with betrayal. You used me. I reach for my clipboard, slip my pen from my pocket. Didn't have much choice. People are dying in this town. They're killing their loved ones, carving off faces, just the same way my sister did. And I have to know why, Jonah. I have to know why Zipperjaw does these awful things. He recoils, disgusted. You actually think your sister would be okay with this? Sacrificing some traumatized teenager just to satisfy your stupid revenge fantasy? My eye twitches. Adelaide. She wouldn't think this was stupid. She'd be proud of her big brother, wouldn't she? I shake my head, forcing her memory back into its grave. My sister's dead, I grunt. This isn't about what she would want. It's about what I need. It's about making Zipperjaw pay for what it took. You're deranged, he mutters, an absolute lunatic. Maybe, but you know as well as I do what happens at midnight. My pen clicks, stabs the clipboard like a knife. So I'd start talking, or pretty soon you won't have a face to talk with. Jonah glares at me like he wants to strangle me. My pen taps against the clipboard. Impatient, firm, talk, kid. Why should I? Because if you don't tell me what you know about Zipperjaw, we're both dead. He folds his arms, keeps glaring. Whose fault is that? You manipulated me. Maybe this is your karma, prick. I nearly laugh. If karma exists, it's not letting me off this easy. You're upset. I get it. I'd be pissed too. Maybe pissed enough to let a monster kill me just to get even with the prick that used me. So I'm not going to blame you if you don't talk. But I also know you and I are different in important ways. Yeah, he spits. I've actually got a heart. You sure do. And I wonder how that heart will feel knowing you didn't just succeed in killing me, but all the people Zipperjaw kills after us too. His expression fractures, the anger crumbling to horror. You can't put their deaths on me. That's not fair. A smirk finds my lips. Why not? I'm the only shot this town has at stopping this monster, so you can sit tight, keep quiet if you want. I'm a dead man regardless, but all the blood Zipperjaw spills next will be on your hands. His lips start to move, searching for some argument to defend himself, to justify why killing me is worth it, but then his shoulders slump. He heaves a sigh. The beautiful thing about people like Jonah is that they're so predictable, tug on their heartstrings, play with their shame. It hardly takes anything at all to make them dance like puppets on strings. Fine, he grumbles, avoiding my eyes. What do you need to know? My pen clicks. Let's start with the name. Who handed you that curse? This kid at school, Vishal, his cousins died in one of the cannibal suicides, and the day after he went on livestream. My jaw tenses. Livestream? If this kid's saying Zipperjaw's name all over the internet, then don't worry, Jonah says, recognizing my building panic. No one watched the stream. It was just 12 hours of Vishal walking in circles, crying silently in his grandmother's living room. I only dropped in to share my condolences, but then he started mumbling something I couldn't make out. Jonah reaches for his glass of water by his bed, sucks it through a straw. He was speaking too fast, too quiet. It sounded like he'd lost his mind, but something told me to record the clip. I don't know. Call it morbid curiosity. The day after, Vishal didn't turn up at school. It didn't take long before the whole town knew why. He'd been found dead with his grandmother's face in his teeth. A shiver runs through him. That's when my morbid curiosity hit a fever pitch. I ran Vishal's mumbling through editing software, slowed it down, boosted the audio. I'd hoped to find some clue about the cannibal suicides, but what I found was Zipperjaw, I whisper. He nods. A few hours later, I heard a knock on my front door. A few hours, meaning midnight. Another nod. I check a handful of boxes on my clipboard. A manic smirk tugs at the edge of my lips. The knock. Describe it. Jonah hammers his fist against his bedside table. Bang, bang, bang. It sounded like that, loud as hell. Woke up my dad. He shouted at me from his bedroom, said if that was Ryan being a racket again, then he'd call the cops and treat the kid to a night in jail. I told him I'd answer it, tell my buddy to beat it if he was out there. Meanwhile, the knocking got more frantic, shook the entire house. Bang, bang, bang. I booked it downstairs before my dad could make good on his promise, and that's when I saw the silhouette through the fogged glass. It was standing on the doorstep with its back to me. I knew right away that wasn't Ryan, and that something was seriously wrong. I keep writing, not looking up from the clipboard. Why? For starters, the silhouette was tall, way too tall. Ballpark it. His face screws up in thought. 7 feet maybe, could have been taller. My stomach twists. I feel what might be goosebumps running down my arms, and I wonder how long it's been since the last time I felt this kind of dread. Did you call for your father? He shakes his head. No, I was too shell-shocked, I think. That and he hesitates, shrinking into his bed. There was a voice out there, a little girl's. She said she was hurt and afraid, and that she needed help because a man was hurting her. I lower my pen slowly, meeting his eyes. Tell me you didn't open the door. Of course I didn't. His expression falls. Or at least I didn't at first. You've got to be kidding me. I'd only meant to check on the little girl, he says defensively. To be honest, I didn't even think the silhouette was a person. I mean, who in this town is over 7 feet tall? Nobody. I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light or... He trails off, unable to buy his excuses. But the truth is, I can't blame the kid. Society is conditioned to believe there's no such thing as monsters. If a giant shadow shows up on your doorstep in the dead of night, your first thought isn't to grab the holy water. It's to double check if you took your meds. Add a crying child into the mix, and you're liable to start behaving erratically, impulsively. Is that how Zipperjaw tricked you, Adelaide? Did you think you were saving a frightened child only to come face to face with a living nightmare? My pen snaps in my grip, ink exploding across the page like a bad Rorschach. Jonah gulps. You all good, man? You ever feel your purpose crawling back into your veins? I ask him quietly, grabbing a fresh pen and page from the briefcase. I feel better than I've felt in years, but let's refocus. You open the door. What did you see? Jonah's heart monitor begins to pick up the pace. His mouth hangs open, the words struggling to form on his lips. He looks haunted, vacant. He looks like a boy remembering the worst night of his life. Jonah, I press. We don't have time for this. What did you see? His eyes scrunch shut. His body quakes with the sort of fear that carves itself into your bones. I saw... The heart monitor starts to scream. I saw Zipperjaw. Now we're getting somewhere. My new pen touches my fresh report, and I start to write like my life depends on it, like both of our lives depend on it. What did it look like? Clothing, anatomy, give me everything you got. It wore a dress, he chokes out, just scraps of clothing patched together like it had cut pieces from all its victims' clothes and then sewn them back together. Denim, plaid, there was a piece of a wedding veil, a rainbow scarf, and his voice breaks, hand shooting to his mouth to catch a sob, and pajamas, the sort that only a kid would wear. My hand balls into a fist. I'd been under the impression that Zipperjaw merely took lives, but it seems its ritual went deeper. The monster took mementos too, souvenirs. A cold sweat lines my brow. What else have I missed, I wonder? Jonah keeps talking, hands fretting on his lap. I remember it had this jungle of hair that fell to its waist, red, dark. Not sure if that was cause it was stained with blood or... His face pales. And its proportions were all screwed up too. Remember when I said it was tall? Sure. Well, it was. Only parts of it weren't. I frown. Its torso was long. Jonah spreads his arms outward for effect. Like maybe 6 feet long, but its limbs were too short. Its arms and legs didn't look like they belonged to it. They were too small, too young. It looked like they'd be torn off children and stapled onto that monster. There it is again, that anger boiling in my gut. My grip tightens around my pen all over again. It takes everything I have not to snap this one in half too. Adelaide, was that thing wearing your limbs? Did it have your arms, your legs? Was it... The lights flicker, die. Darkness fills the room like flood water. Jonah shoots up in his bed, breath coming a mile a minute. Was that you? He gasps. I rise from my seat, shake my head, my ears strain against the empty silence. There should be ventilation, the beep of Jonah's heart monitor. There should be that sickening ambiance only a broken healthcare system can produce. But there's nothing. It's here, isn't it? Jonah whimpers, looking around frantically. Number it can't be. According to my pocket watch, it's just 11:31 p.m. Zipperjaw's legend is clear. The monster always arrives at midnight, yet there's something in the outside corridor. Footsteps, bare feet slapping against linoleum, and what sounds like a whimpering girl. Jonah reaches out, grabs my shoulder. That's it, that's what I heard. Did you figure it out yet? How to kill it? Tell me you know how to kill it, mans. I tense, slipping away from him. Haven't got a clue, sorry. Jonah stares after me, slack-jawed as I drift toward the door, unholstering my Desert Eagle and bringing it up on aim. The footsteps are getting closer, heavier. Zip it. The voice is Titanic, deafening. It stops me cold in my tracks. Gone is the whimpering girl. This is the voice of a man, scolding and guttural and dripping with violence. If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Zip it, you brat. My chest tightens. The man. He almost sounds like Dash Dash. The door shudders. Jonah yelps. Open up or you'll be sorry. I stagger back, heart ricocheting off my ribs. Knock, knock, knock. The whole hospital shakes. My thumb pulls back on the safety, finger on the trigger. This shouldn't be happening. We had more time. We needed more time. Just shoot it, Jonah pleads, now, before it comes in. I grit my teeth. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. I've hunted enough boogeymen to know that bullets might slow them down, but to kill them, you have to beat them at their own game. Use their rules against them. The gun was never meant for Zipperjaw. It was meant for us. Bang. The door splinters, a fist bursting through, followed by an arm. It's decaying, mottled. The hand starts feeling around, trying to find the door handle, trying to let itself in, but the arm isn't long enough to reach. Jonah was right. This thing, it's wearing the limbs of a child. The monster wrenches its arm back through the hole. There's a shift of shadow, a shuffle of fabric, and then a creak like old bones bending down. It's hard to see much with the lights dead. It's just the faint shafts of moonlight I'm working with, but what appears next chills my blood. It's there in the shattered hole, a zipper curved upward like a smile stitched onto the face of a corpse. A small hand reaches up, unzips the mouth, then it speaks. Only this time the voice is quieter, measured in a way that makes it all the worse. I'll be back at midnight and teach you both a lesson you won't soon forget. Bang, it hammers the door one last time. There's a crack like a spine straightening, followed by a vicious snort. Then the footsteps begin to retreat, bare feet slapping across linoleum, disappearing down the hallway. And I'm left alone with Jonah, trembling, terrified. I'm trying to think, trying to pull myself together, but I'm haunted by the same looping thought that I recognize that monster's voice. It belongs to my father. James slid his fingers down my waist and tucked them into my back pocket, bending over to kiss me on the cheek. We stood like that in our freshly manicured front lawn, watching the movers carry our furniture up the front steps and into our new home. In our old apartment on the outskirts of the city, that furniture had felt large and compact like a can of sardines. It was difficult to even maneuver to the fridge and back. Here in the suburbs, where every house was a cream-colored cookie-cutter copy of each other, it would feel like dollhouse decor. I took James by the wrist, removing his hand from my backside and giving him a coy smile. Our honeymoon phase hadn't really ever ended, not since we started dating and definitely not since our wedding. I didn't think it ever would. Is this too much? I asked, resting my head on his shoulder. It'll feel so empty with just the two of us. For now, he muttered, and I could feel him smiling. We had never even really discussed starting a family, just because it felt so implied. We could always just read each other's minds like that. I knew he wanted kids as soon as possible, but I also knew he knew I wanted to wait a little longer, and he respected that. It was inevitable, but not a priority. I looked around. I always found neighborhoods like this one a little creepy. They felt simulated and devoid of actual life, but not this one. Somehow, even though the houses were the same, they each felt different. The home to our left appeared empty, with a colorful for sale sign on the lawn, but the one to our right was lively. The windows were adorned with bright pink flowers overflowing from their pots, and the yard was sprinkled with children's toys. Even now there were kids outside. A young boy who appeared around 12 years of age, pushing a younger girl on a yellow swing set. Their laughter filled the air. "Hello," a cheerful voice called, and I turned to see a woman marching towards us with a gleaming smile on her face. She was beautiful and young, maybe around my age, with blonde hair tied up in a pristine ponytail. Her pants fit her perfectly, accentuating her feminine curves, and her blouse was bunched up around her pregnant stomach. I felt myself subconsciously cross my arms, insecure. "Hello," my husband replied, bringing me out of my daze. I realized the woman was holding a dish wrapped in tinfoil and steaming. "You're the new neighbors, I presume?" she asked, her smile only brightening, revealing her perfectly white teeth. "Yes," I said, not wanting her to think I was rude. "I'm Adeline, this is James. We're so excited, this is such a lovely neighborhood." "As are we. My husband and I were so pleased to hear a young couple was moving in. It really is the perfect place to raise a family," she said knowingly, glancing at her children and then back at us. "Oh, we don't have kids," I said, a nervous laugh bubbling up in my throat. "Oh," she exclaimed. Her smile seemed to falter, but almost as if it were a glitch, it was so brief. She held out the dish in her hands. Tuna casserole. James took it from her, peeling back some of the foil and taking a whiff. "Smells delicious." "We never caught your name," I said, leaning into my husband's side. "You are..." The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. I waited for her to answer. "Honey," a gruff voice called from the neighbor's doorway. It seemed almost unnaturally loud, not as if he was yelling, but like his voice was amplified somehow. The woman smiled at us again apologetically. "I must be going," she said, resting her hands on her stomach. "We will have to get together sometime." James and I only had the time to nod before she was turning away, walking quickly back towards who I assumed must be her husband. I saw something move on the second floor of their house, baby blue curtains parting. I looked up and met the eyes of two more children. They appeared to be twin girls, maybe 4 or 5. One of them waved, the other just stared. Embarrassingly enough, we didn't get to eat the casserole until several days later. Those days were full of hauling heavy boxes from our car and putting everything where it belonged, and my ears still rung with the sound of drills as I took the baking dish out of the freezer to thaw. "It'll be nice to eat something other than than takeout, James said, sitting at our kitchen table and resting his head in his hands. Yeah, I replied, but I'm not sure how I feel about 2-day-old tuna. I walked over, nudging him with my hip. He pulled out his chair, guiding me down on his lap and wrapping his arms around my waist. There was so much excitement in the air as we had set up our new home, but I felt like we hadn't had any time to settle in yet. I had barely been alone with him in any meaningful way. It was the first time since our wedding day that we hadn't been all over each other. He pressed his mouth against my collarbone, trailing his lips up my neck into my ear. I felt a giggle rise in my chest, running my fingers through his slightly oily hair. When's the last time you showered? I teased, and I felt him laugh against my skin. I was waiting for you, my love. I smiled. You're disgusting. We'd better hurry up and eat then. The oven dinged, letting me know it was preheated. It took everything in me to get up, off of James. Right as my fingers wrapped around the handle, my other hand reaching for the casserole, I heard something. I froze, tilting my head towards the window. The night was warm and still. I could see warm yellow light glowing in the neighbor's windows, a perfect caricature. Did you hear that? My husband didn't seem to be paying attention, fiddling with a loose leg of his chair. What do you mean? I thought I heard something. Before I could dismiss it as delusion, it came again. It was a sound like a cat with its tail being stomped on, a faint yet blood-curdling screech. I looked closer at the house, but nothing seemed amiss. There was an even louder moaning sound, and then another scream, far clearer this time. What was that? James asked, now standing. I shook my head. I have no idea. Maybe the neighbors are watching a movie? A crash and another scream. Something moved in one of the windows, and then the curtains were yanked shut. Should I go and check? I can do it. My husband shifted nervously. I shook my head. He would do it, but I knew he didn't want to. He had always been skittish, especially at night. I'll go. I grabbed an oven mitt and tossed it at him. It hit his chest and fell to the kitchen floor. Put in the casserole. I'll be right back. The night felt even more quiet when I stepped outside, almost eerily so. The air felt so heavy and still, like I was standing inside of a painting of a street. My footsteps echoed against the pavement, and I tensed each time another scream rang out from the house. What the hell? I muttered, half out of curiosity and half just to hear a human voice. I knocked on the front door 3 times, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. I was already starting to regret coming over here, feeling silly for disturbing their night if it really was nothing. Even their porch was pristine. The white paint looked fresh, and even the dolls and toy cars strewn against the railing looked organized. I heard footsteps and the front door opened a crack. I caught a glimpse of a man's face, his jaw square and dusted with stubble. Good evening, Adeline, he greeted me. Hi, I said, my voice coming out far softer than I meant for it to. Good evening, I thought I heard something. Is everything okay? He hesitated, then smiled. It looked a little forced. He opened the door wider, and I had to stop myself from flinching. His white button-down was stained with flecks of blood, bright red and fresh. There was a child clinging to his pant leg, a little boy that I didn't recognize. Everything is all right, he told me, tussling the boy's hair absent-mindedly. My wife is just going into labor. Oh, I exclaimed, blinking at him in shock. He seemed incredibly calm, considering the circumstances. Should we call someone, an ambulance? No, he said quickly, his smile fading the tiniest bit. No, that's quite all right. Thank you for your concern. This isn't her first rodeo, so to speak. He chuckled stiffly. Oh, okay, well, tell her congratulations. Will do. He seemed to look me up and down, and a shiver creeped up my spine. Well, have a lovely night, and we're so happy you moved in. He went to close the door on me, turning away, but at the last second, the little boy shoved his hand through the crack. A piece of notebook paper fluttered to the slats of the porch, and the door closed with a sharp click. I picked up the piece of paper, somewhat stunned, as another scream ricocheted inside my head. I unfolded it slowly, holding it under the porch light and squinting to make out what the shaky scratches of red crayon read. Mommy makes lots of babies. It was only a week later that I got a call on the house phone. I was in the bath and I ran to the kitchen, a towel wrapped around my waist and my hair dripping warm water down my back. Hello, I said into the receiver, clutching the phone with both hands. Somehow I already knew who it would be. Hello, Adeline. Her voice was just as cheerful as it had been that first day we'd moved in, like a jingling bell hanging from the door of a shop. How are you, dear? I'm fine, I replied, my eyebrows cinching into an involuntary frown. How are you? How's the baby? What? She sounded genuinely confused, but only for a second. Oh, the baby's just fine. Such a miracle of life, isn't it? Yes, such a miracle. That's amazing. I'm so happy for you. Yes, so listen, I was hoping you and your husband would come by tonight for a little dinner party. I made tuna casserole. Please, please say you will. I swallowed. Something about her was beginning to unnerve me. Something about how perky she was only days after labor, but I still didn't want to be rude, and it wasn't like I didn't like her. I didn't want to pass up any friends, especially when they lived just next door. Of course, I said, hoping she could hear my polite smile. We'll be there. I clutched my Tupperware of cookies tightly to my chest as James guided me up the front steps. I prayed they wouldn't be able to tell they were store-bought, although I was sure they wouldn't say anything even if they did. James knocked on the door, then tutted and picked at some chipped white paint next to the peephole. Looks like they need a new paint job out here. Maybe I should offer? Babe, that's rude, I told him, a strange feeling twisting in my stomach. Something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Our neighbor threw open the door, beaming at us. She was wearing a pink flowery dress and a white apron. I'm so glad you could make it. Come on in. Everyone's waiting in the dining room. I couldn't help but stare at her stomach, which seemed almost as large as it had been the day we'd met. I glanced at my husband, but he didn't seem to have noticed anything and only smiled at me reassuringly. Admittedly, I didn't know as much as I could about childbirth, but I knew your stomach stayed large for at least a few days. Surely her body just hadn't recovered yet. Their dining room was larger than ours, or maybe that was just the way it was decorated. It was minimal. The only personal items I could see were more toys. At their long dining table there were 6 places set. A little girl sat at one of them, quietly playing with a Barbie doll, and a teenager sat next to her, scowling at us. I didn't recognize either of them. This couple seemed so young. How could they have a teenager already? Some people started early, I guess. I had assumed dinner party meant there would be more people, but I felt guilty for assuming that. They were so eager to spend time with us. Maybe they just didn't have many other friends, especially with so many children running around. Across from the kids sat her husband, grinning at us. I blinked. He didn't look how I remembered him. Hadn't her husband been a brunette? This man's hair was a lighter brown, almost a dirty blonde, and his face seemed softer. It must have just been the lighting, I told myself. Surely in the dark, his features had just looked bleak and more severe. The woman immediately started bustling around in the kitchen, and James and I took our seats. I stared at the glass of wine already set out in front of me, the dark red liquid reminding me suddenly of that night, of the blood splattered across the man's shirt. James began chatting up the husband, but I couldn't bring myself to keep up. I just stared into the glass, swirling the wine around, watching it lap up against the rim. It was so dark, almost black. We didn't even know these people's names. Were we so rude that we had never asked? Was that a bug? I dipped my finger into my wine and fished out a small fly, still buzzing desperately. Looking around quickly, I flicked it off my finger into the ground, not wanting to embarrass our hosts. Such a lovely home, James was saying, and I smiled and nodded as if I had been listening. Yes, I butt in and then hesitated. Forgive me, but I've forgotten your name. The man's grin didn't falter. Joseph, he said happily. No need to apologize, I'm Joseph. And your wife? Dinner is served, the woman called, interrupting me. She wielded a large dish which gave off a faint fishy aroma, setting it down with a flourish in the center of the table. Thank goodness, honey, I'm starving. Joseph tucked his napkin into his shirt and picked up his fork and his knife, clutching them in both hands cartoonishly. I looked at James, searching for any semblance of confusion. I found none, only a polite smile. This is the children's favorite dish, she told us, taking my husband's plate. How many kids do you have? Here you are, love, she said, scooping a helping of casserole onto his plate and reaching over me to set it down in front of him. As she leaned over me, I caught a glimpse of her face. Her skin seemed to glisten around her eyes like it was wet. Growing boys need to eat. James chuckled nervously, the first hint I'd gotten of anything amiss. That's what I keep telling Adeline. Joseph laughed uproariously, pounding his fist on the table. I caught the teenager jump and the little girl set down her Barbie, but I couldn't decipher the expression on either of their faces. A man of my own heart, he cried, and he didn't stop laughing. What did you bring us? The woman asked after a moment, nodding at the Tupperware, having to raise her voice to be heard over her husband's laughter. I swallowed. Chocolate chip cookies. Lovely. I gazed down at the food she'd put in front of me. It smelled even fishier up close, nothing like the first one she'd given us. I picked up my fork, picking at a flaky corner. A fish bone stuck to the prongs, long and slender and sharp. I hope you'll eat it all, the woman said to me, leaning over so close her blonde curls tumbled onto my shoulder. She smelled of perfume and faintly of fish. Now that she was close to me, I could see clearly that her face was in fact wet. You simply must get used to eating for two. After that dinner, it wasn't that I was avoiding them, but I didn't make much of an effort to get closer. I felt deeply uncomfortable in a way that I didn't quite like to think about. Even so, I told myself it wasn't them, we just had gotten busy. James had started his new job in the city, starting construction on a new shopping mall, and I had a big interview coming up. I simply didn't have much time to think about our neighbors. Not that they didn't make it difficult not to. Neither of us got much sleep anymore. The sound of a crying baby kept us up and made us restless. They baffled me during the day too. One Monday before James had gotten home, I noticed a man out in their yard playing with a few of the children. He was chasing them around the swings, around and around, and they were shrieking with glee. My curiosity got the better of me. Was this an uncle, a babysitter? I knew little to nothing about this family, and I figured that was what was unnerving me so much. Maybe if I knew more, I would feel comfortable living next to them. Before I could stop myself, I walked out, watching them play for another moment before speaking. "Hi," I called out, and all four of them turned to face me. "Hello, I'm Adeline. I live next door. Sorry to be nosy, I was just wondering, how are you related to the family?" The man smiled at me just like the rest of them, widely. Up close, he looked even older, maybe in his 40s. He must be a relative of some sort. "Don't be sorry, Adeline. I'm their son. We've been so happy that you moved in." After that, I put even more distance between myself and the neighbors. I was sure there was a logical explanation for all of this, but if I thought too hard about it, I felt like my brain would explode. A couple of nights later, James had had enough. "That's it," he muttered against my shoulder, squeezing me from behind. "I'm going over there." I groaned, rolling over and pressing our noses together. Even with my eyes crossed, I could see his dark circles, and his hair stuck up wildly from tossing and turning. "Don't, honey," I whispered, my voice raspy. "It's okay, it's not their fault. Surely they can do something," he argued, gently running his fingers through my hair despite his abrasive tone. "Jesus, it's almost louder with the windows closed. How many babies do they have over there anyways?" I paused and thought about his question, and I listened. I hadn't realized, but he was right. The crying didn't sound like one infant, it sounded like a whole chorus. "I can do it if you want," I muttered, but he shook his head. "No, it's okay, I'll go. You went last time." He pulled back the covers and got to his feet, reaching for his pants next to the bedside table. I sat up and watched him get dressed, and once he had kissed me and walked downstairs, I stood up to peer blearily through the bedroom window. It was raining that night, the first rain we'd seen since moving in. It made the neighbor's house look much older than it was, almost like a haunted house. In the darkness and the storm, it almost looked dilapidated. I watched my husband tread through the mud, smiling at how goofy he looked carrying our purple umbrella. I watched him march up the front steps, shaking the water off of himself and knocking on the front door. I remember it so vividly. It wasn't a dream. I remember him knocking, and then so quickly it was unnatural, the front door opened. I didn't see who was behind it, but I saw a bright flash of light and heard a deafening gunshot, and my husband fell to the porch. His chest was eviscerated, blood and guts spewed out on the wood, my husband's warm body still twitching. I remember staring, shaking in complete shock. I remember seeing curtains parting from the corner of my eye, but I couldn't pull my eyes away from his body. I remember everything going black, like static taking over my vision and falling. I was surrounded by red meat and blood, and a sticky white substance. I was naked and wet, and I couldn't move. All my limbs were cramped up against my body. I felt a pull pulling me, sucking me down into the redness and the darkness. I heard a voice, a woman's voice, muffled and distant, screaming and sobbing. "No, I don't want to, please, I don't want any more." I saw a bright light, and I woke up in my bed, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My husband sat up next to me, woken no doubt by my violent cries. He pulled me against my chest, stroking my hair, but I wouldn't stop shaking. It's okay, just a dream." But it wasn't just a dream, I saw it. I had seen him die. It had been so real, so vivid. I was still mourning, still in shock, curled up in his lap. It couldn't have been a dream. She brought me a pie the next day, the wife. James had stayed home from work to console me. me, deeply alarmed by my reaction to what he thought was just a bad dream. He offered to get the door, but I didn't want him to. I didn't want him anywhere near a front door ever again. I turned the knob with shaking hands, and there she stood, her hair tied up in a messy ponytail, clutching a pie tin in front of her. She was still pregnant. She held it out to me, her smile gleaming and wide, but her eyes apologetic. I wanted to apologize for the noise, she said cheerfully, tilting her head. I hope it hasn't kept you up. It's just so difficult sometimes with newborns. You of all people would understand. I don't have kids, I said bluntly, eyeing the pie. It must have been cherry, it was red, so red. Remember? She blinked at me. Oh yes, of course. She held out the pie, pushing it into my hands. Please take it. I cautiously took it from her. It was so red inside, like the red from my dream, like my husband's guts. When I looked back up, she was still smiling, but there were tears streaming down her face and dripping off her chin. I stared at her blankly. Are you okay? Yes, oh yes, I'm fantastic, dear. Without warning, she opened her arms and pulled me in, hugging me tightly, the pie tin crumbling between us. We're just so glad you moved in. I heard a sound like water trickling, and I cringed as something wet touched my legs. I pulled back and looked down to see liquid trickling down her thighs, slightly pink and sticky. She raised her eyebrows inquisitively, then looked down at herself and seemed to blush. Oh my, yes, you must excuse me. She gave me another smile, so wide it looked like it might hurt, still weeping silently. She looked older than before. I'm so sorry. Again, I'm so sorry. She killed herself a couple of days later. I saw it happen. I felt an urge to look out of our bedroom window around 5 in the morning, and I saw her standing on the roof of the neighbor's house. She seemed to look me right in the eyes before she plummeted. I ran down the stairs as quickly as I could, almost tripping and cracking my head open. When I got outside, everything looked different. The house looked different, old, like it hadn't been lived in years. The yard was overgrown, the grass swallowing up the children's toys, and the pink flowers on the windowsills were shriveled and brown. The porch was dirty and packed with things, as if only hoarders had ever resided there. The paramedics came after I called 911 and the police, and it occurred to me that it was the first time I had seen anyone other than us and the neighbors on that street. They told me it was a good thing I had called because no one else would have. When I asked what that meant, they just looked at me blankly. No one else lives here, ma'am, one of them told me, as if it were obvious. I stared at her body until they took her away. She looked different, she looked old. Even so, I could have sworn I saw her stomach growing. I heard them call her Jane Doe as they zipped up the black body bag. That was a few months ago. We moved back into our apartment closer to the city, and even though it's cramped here, it feels so much more comfortable. I've been going to therapy, trying desperately to figure out if what I witnessed was real or pure insanity. My therapist seems to think it was stress. Somehow so does my husband, as if he wasn't there, as if he didn't see what I did. He seems different. I've noticed things, like how the mole on the back of his wrist is gone now, and how his hair grows slightly curly when it used to be so straight. I can't get the image of him that night out of my head, his body destroyed and drenched in gore, his eyes still open. I've been throwing up every morning, but I won't test. I'm terrified to confirm what I already know. My father named me Arav, so I would have a competitive advantage in life. He wanted me to appear at the top of class registers and government databases. He wanted me to be noticed, what I would give to never be noticed again. Anyhow, I'm aware that many Indian parents choose A names for children, but the point is that my parents wanted the best for me. Life doesn't ever go to plan, does it? Ma and Papa died in a car accident when I was 6 years old. That would have been awful enough, but then I found myself living on the streets, rather than in an orphanage. Papa often told me that I had Lakshmi, goddess of wealth and fortuitousness, on my side. Alas, it was a Lakshmi, the goddess of misfortune, who set her sights upon me. Or perhaps a Rakshasa, a demon. I used to tell myself that. Better the devil you know. In truth, I don't know what I saw in that New Delhi slum, and the unknown terrifies me more than any nightmare detailed in religious texts. After my parents died, I sought escapism in Hindu mythology. I would pinch religious books from local libraries so as to feel some sort of connection to Ma and Papa. They had always been devout followers of the faith. I needed escapism not only from grief, but from life on the streets. I spent 3 years living with pickpockets between 6 and 12 years of age. They helped me to survive when I had nothing and no one. That feels eons ago now. I'm a 29-year-old software developer working in Paris. I often wonder whether I would have stayed in India had it not been for a horrifying experience, something which incentivized me to do whatever possible to get far, far away from the slums, the city, the country, heck, the continent. 2 decades later, I know that nowhere is far enough. The year was 2004, and I was a 9-year-old street urchin, an orphan who subsisted on rupees pilfered from Delhi's inhabitants. My group mostly targeted tourists, but it was an Indian businessman who caught my eye on this particular February morning. He looked displaced in the slums, like he'd strayed a little too far from Gurgaon's gentrified streets of glass and smog. Displaced fools are the best earners. The stranger was strolling stiffly, in odd, unnatural movements, along a cramped passageway of street stalls. He was a conspicuous man with a navy 3-piece suit, pristine black loafers, and an upper face shrouded by a black shawl. I remember being a little puzzled by his covered eyes. I wondered how he could see where he was walking. Of course, money was the main thing on my mind. Well, food, but money was necessary precursor to that, so it didn't matter that he was odd, it mattered only that he was important. And I knew that without a shadow of a doubt, as I'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of noticing important men. Of course, I wish I hadn't noticed him. I wish I hadn't swiped the leather wallet from the side pocket of his trousers. And I wish I hadn't seen it. In one of the wallet's slots, below a healthy wad of green notes, was a Polaroid. Ordinarily, I would have pocketed half the cash, then returned the wallet to the victim's pocket. It's always best to stick to rupees. Wealthy folk often lose track of how many notes they carry, so they don't miss a few hundred rupees. Following this line of reasoning, my friends and I rarely aroused suspicion. I should have stuck to the plan, should have taken the money, returned the wallet, and fled. But something about the white border of that Polaroid, brown stained but poking tantalizingly out of the leather pouch, intrigued me, and I made the decision to let my finely tuned routine fall to the wayside. I let the businessman start to walk away. I broke all of the rules, and after I wiggled the photograph free, I whimpered, almost dropping both the wallet and the Polaroid. It was a picture of me, a picture that I didn't remember anyone taking, a picture of a place I'd never visited. There I stood, a boy with a blue tattered t-shirt, maroon stained trousers, and bare feet. I was smudged a little, as if somebody taller had been standing in my place previously, and I was standing in a damp bedroom with mold-ridden walls and upper bunks clinging to the 2 walls. The camera flash should have illuminated the entire space, given that it was such a small room. The room shouldn't and couldn't have been a large space, yet it seemed unfathomably big, too big for the light to reach the blackness beyond the bunk beds. I looked frightened. My head was starting to turn, and my brown pupils were crawling across the whites of my eyes, as if daring to look behind me, as if there were something I'd seen or heard in that unlit back end of the room. I trembled, fearfully scrunching the Polaroid in one hand and the wallet in the other. My instinct was to look up at the man I'd robbed, though I expected him to have left the vicinity. He hadn't. Standing motionlessly at the end of the dirt path ahead, like a rock bearing the crashing tide of impoverished market goers against it, was that wealthy, navy-suited businessman. He was facing away from me, and that deeply unsettled my gut, more than the impossible Polaroid I'd discovered. Something was uneven about the way in which this man had paused in the middle of the path. Then he began to turn, began to pivot on loafers that seemed impossibly clean in contrast with the dirt beneath his feet. He twisted around until he was facing me directly, and I finally got a proper look at him. The black shawl still covered the man's upper face, but his lips still showed. They had transformed into subhuman features, had turned a muted gray without even a hint of red, as if belonging to a corpse. The man's mouth neither smiled nor frowned. It simply started to open, and long strands of brown connected the upper and lower lips, gunky and thick like rubbery mucus. Beyond the lips and the brown strands of unknown consistency was a black pit, an entrance that led to the man's gullet. Staring at it pained my eyes and left a quiver in my heart. The black seemed to be tugging my eyes towards it. I felt a strain in my retinas, felt my eyes start to bulge, and then the man started to take powerful strides towards me. I wanted to run. I still don't know why I didn't. He may have fixed me to the spot, with eyes or something worse hidden beneath that shawl. The man took angular strides towards me with gray lips parting wider and wider to reveal a lightless cavity within, a version of hell ready to engulf me. However, moments before the gentleman came close enough to touch me, there sounded a harsh brain honk. I spun to look at an impatient driver sitting in a green and yellow tuk-tuk, so I stumbled sideways to let the still moving vehicle scoot past. But when I returned my gaze to the direction of the approaching businessman, he was gone, and the only remaining evidence which convinced me that I hadn't imagined any of the horridness was the Polaroid I'd crumpled in a teensy quaking fist. When I arrived at the wooden shanty I called home, I was rebuked by one of the older boys for not returning the wallet to my victim's pocket. He said something along the lines of, "You just dropped a leather turd on our doorstep, Arav, and we don't crap where we eat." I was evicted essentially, but that was the best thing to happen to me. It got me out of that hellish cycle with nothing in my possession but a handful of rupees and a haunting photograph. A photograph that I dumped at the side of a road before leaving the slums behind. All I wanted was to leave India, run as far as I could for as long as I could. That impossible photograph left me feeling unsafe, left me feeling pursued. To leave I needed money, so I pleaded with any and every business owner on the streets of New Delhi. A few unsavory sorts offered me work as a pickpocket, but I declined. I had to leave that life behind, and I didn't want to run into that suited spirit ever again. I was eventually blessed by a sweet couple who owned a restaurant in Connaught Place. They adopted me, and I was enrolled in a new school. I had just turned 10 years old, so I was about 4 years behind my classmates, but I eventually caught up. My goal initially was to get far away from the navy-suited man, the man with the photograph that made no sense to me. How did he know I would pick his pocket? I wondered. How did he create a photo of something that never happened? As the years went by, however, I lost sight of my goal, lost sight of my superstitious fears, lost sight of my religion. In 2014, at the age of 19, I believed that it had all been a dream, that I'd simply exaggerated events in my head. There had been no Polaroid. There had only been a string of traumatic events which had warped the mind and memories of a poor child. I no longer wanted to leave Delhi. I felt safe. That all changed on a late-night taxi ride. The driver released a series of expletives as his withered old tuk-tuk spluttered to an abrupt stop on a dirt road. We both stepped out of the rickety rickshaw to inspect the damage, but the driver shooed me off. "You'll only get in the way," he said. I rolled my eyes, but it made no difference to me. I remembered the slums at night. I felt comfortable there. In fact, I recognized the road. The ramshackle houses and empty market stalls looked different at night, but the street itself hadn't changed in the past decade. I had returned to my old pickpocketing grounds, but my stomach dropped when I saw it, crumpled up at the side of the road, exactly where I had dumped it 10 years earlier. I called it a coincidence, but I knew better. The photograph at my feet was that Polaroid from a decade earlier. I should have left it. I should have just kept my hands in my pockets until the taxi driver had fixed his tuk-tuk. Instead, I squatted and scooped the Polaroid out of the dirt. Then, using my phone's torch, I illuminated the picture in my weak, unwilling hands. What came from my lips next was a scream. I screamed not because this was the same photo from 10 years earlier, but because it wasn't the same photo at all. It was a new picture of me. Gone was the young, frightened boy in the dark bedroom. In his place was a teenage version of Arav standing at the side of a dirt road next to a broken down tuk-tuk, looking down at a mangled Polaroid in his hands. The scene depicted was impossible. The photograph had already been lying on the road, yet it depicted a scene that had yet to pass. I shot my eyes upwards, searching for the photographer who had to be standing at the other side of the road. However, as I eyeballed that spot, I saw only a black alleyway branching off from the dirt road, a road barely lit by a few sporadic lamps and string lights. Regardless, even with no light to reveal the passageway, I felt absolutely certain that something lurked in the dark. The taxi driver stirred me from my terrified trance, announcing that the tuk-tuk was operational once more. I didn't need to be told twice. I hopped into the vehicle and shrank into a fetal position, feeling vulnerable, exposed as the vehicle, with no doors to provide even an illusion of safety, trundled slowly past the black alleyway. I was only a foot away from the spot in which the photographer must have stood, and I felt a wisp of wind wash over me as we drove past. With a shudder, I tossed the photograph out of the vehicle and vowed never to return to that street again. Vowed, as I had 10 years earlier, to leave India behind for good. Leave that man behind for good. I quit my porter role at the restaurant. My new ma and papa were sad to see me go, but they understood that I needed something better, not that they knew the full story. I found a job vacancy with a cruise line, and my hospitality experience helped me to secure the role. Out at sea, I'll be safe, I naively believed. It sounds silly looking back, silly to believe that this man with the power of premonitions would be unable to find me. I'd left India, and that, in my eyes, equaled safety. I would never return to that street in Delhi, so I would never return to my trauma. It all seemed logical. But when I was appointed to clean room 11 on the 3rd level, I started to suspect that I'd been wrong. As I walked down the corridor of rooms, I felt the graze of air against my nape, a gentle breeze that erected my hairs, though I chose to dismiss this warning sign. I didn't want to believe. The truth became undeniable, of course, when the door to 11 opened onto a black room with a crumpled Polaroid lying on the beige carpeted floor. My belly lurched downwards. For a moment, I thought the ship itself might have been sinking to the depths of the ocean, to the depths of hell, to a nightmare that had been awaiting me for a decade. I recognized that room, recognized the bunk beds clinging to the walls, recognized the darkness not penetrated by my phone's torch beam that seemed to harbor some hidden thing at the back of the bedroom. Yet again, I made the mistake of squatting and picking up that photograph. I resigned myself in a way to the fact that I was trapped, that I would never outrun this stalking monstrosity. And then I stumbled backwards as I faced a picture somewhat familiar. It was the very first photo I'd found in the wallet, only that little boy wasn't so little anymore. He was a 19-year-old man, filling the blurry smudge that had been there a decade earlier. I was wearing that same haunted expression on my face, was wearing those same doe-in-the-headlights eyes. It was as I'd always feared. The man was taunting me with prophecies. I thought I'd been changing my fate by running away, but I was always supposed to be in that room, on that ship, not as a child but as a young man. I was always going to end up in room 11, and something was always going to find me, something at the back of the room. No, I realized, eyeing the picture, something in the doorway, taking the photograph. I also realized at this moment that the breeze I'd felt on my neck had been no breeze at all. It had been an exhale of breath warm, stale, and wet, more liquid than gaseous. Don't turn around, I suddenly thought. If you turn, the prophecy in the photograph will come true, and you'll have to face what comes next. But I had to see what was standing behind me in the doorway, what had exhaled warmly onto my skin. I slipped my phone out of my pocket and lifted it up, then I gasped fearfully at the reflection in the black glass of my phone screen. Behind me, there stood a figure in a familiar navy suit and a black shawl, which had been pulled back to reveal, well, I'm not sure. My eyes were straining again, you see, as if something were preventing them from seeing whatever was reflected in the screen. And with jittery hands, I dropped my phone to the floor. I almost turned around to see the man's face in full, but I reminded myself that I had the power to prevent the photograph from coming true. So I closed my eyes and started to back out of the room. Those hot, rancid exhales continued to beat in wretched puffs against my neck as I reversed out of the room. And then I bumped into something immovable, something bolted to the carpeted hallway of the 3rd level. My shirt rubbed against the fabric of a blazer, producing an awful scratching noise. I felt like a child, safe as long as I kept my eyes closed. Somehow that unsound logic rang true, as I eventually managed to sidestep free from the awful creature in the corridor. I ran blindly down the hallway, bumping into walls as I went, and only when I reached the end did I dare to open my eyes, simply to find the button for the lift. After that experience, I decided to return to land. There was no escaping that thing, but being trapped at sea made the nightmare infinitely worse. I felt stifled, claustrophobic. I spent the next few years in education, studying to become a software developer, and then I found a job in Paris, a gargantuan city with plenty of streets, plenty of places to run, for I will always be running. I know that now. Whenever I let my guard down, a crumpled Polaroid will always resurface to unveil some direful prophecy of a future that may come to pass, and I will try my best every time to make sure that it does not, because I don't know what will happen if it does. I don't want sympathy. I just want someone to tell me I'm not crazy. I've run through every explanation, exhaustion, hallucination, gas exposure, but nothing adds up. I know what I saw in that cave. I know what we heard, and more importantly, what we felt. You can say I'm mistaken. That's fine. Just don't tell me it wasn't real. It was my friend Zoe's idea. She's always had a reckless streak. Urban exploring, off-trail hiking, night diving. I usually talk her down, but this time, I don't know. Something about the way she described the cave made me curious. It's not even on any of the maps, she'd said. A guy on the geology forum posted coordinates before his account went dead. Said the wind didn't blow the same down there. I should have said no. We left early. Just 2 backpacks, headlamps, spare batteries, and a rope line. No cell signal where we were going. The cave entrance was narrow, more of a seam in the rock than a mouth. You had to slide in sideways between slabs of limestone to even reach the chamber. The inside was colder than it should have been, still air like nothing moved in or out. Zoe made a joke about ancient burial grounds. I didn't laugh. There was a dampness to the walls, like sweat, not moisture. The rock was wrong too. It looked like it had been scored with something, thin deep gouges, inconsistent in pattern. Not pickaxe marks, not natural erosion. It looked deliberate. We went deeper. The light from the surface was long gone, and all we had was the thin white cone of our headlamps. The passage narrowed, then opened into a wide chamber. I remember thinking the ceiling looked too high for how far we'd gone down, like we were standing in a space that shouldn't exist. Zoe moved ahead of me, scanning the walls. That's when we found it. A bundle of bones tied with what looked like human hair, hanging from the ceiling by a crude length of sinew. No carvings, no symbols, just a mass of bones gently swaying. I whispered, "Zoe, I don't think this is abandoned." She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her voice was hollow. "This wasn't here in the photos." Photos? She hadn't mentioned any pictures before. I didn't ask. I was too focused on the smell that was suddenly thick in the air, like meat left in the sun but sweeter. That's when I heard it, something scraping stone. Not close, not far. Somewhere in that massive, impossible chamber with us. I turned, and for a second, I thought I saw something move. Long and thin, almost like a shadow peeled away from the wall and slipped out of sight. Zoe was already backing up. Her face had gone pale beneath the headlamp's glow. I grabbed her arm and whispered, "We need to go. Now." She didn't argue. We turned, retraced our steps, but the tunnel didn't look the same. The gouges in the walls were deeper now, fresher, some still wet. Zoe started muttering under her breath. I counted it. I counted the turns. I swear I did. I told her to keep moving, keep the rope line in hand, but when I reached for it, there was nothing. The rope was gone, just a frayed end, cut clean. Something had taken it, and it wasn't done with us yet. Zoe was unraveling. Her breaths were fast and shallow, fogging up the inside of her headlamp lens. I grabbed her by the shoulders, more to steady myself than her. "Hey," I said quietly but firmly. "We need to keep our heads. You counted the turns, right? So think, what's next?" She shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't know. I did count them, I swear. 3 right, 2 left, slope downward. But this isn't where we came in." I glanced around. The stone felt tighter somehow. Angrier. The air had thickened, like the cave was exhaling slowly and we were breathing in its rot. That smell was stronger now. Clotted, sickly sweet. I listened. There, beneath Zoe's frantic breathing, not hers, not mine, something deep, rhythmic, a slow drag in and out, not from any one direction, just around us, embedded in the walls or beneath them. I shushed her and held my hand out. She went quiet. We both heard it then, not a growl, not a snarl, just breath, like lungs the size of the room, expanding in time with our fear. I scanned the area. "There, look," I whispered. About 10 feet up, there was a narrow ledge, natural rock, slanted inward like a lip above the tunnel mouth. If we could get up there, maybe we'd get a better view of the layout, or at least feel like we weren't being watched from every direction. I helped Zoe climb first, boosting her from below. Her boots scraped and kicked loose gravel, and I winced with every sound. My turn was harder. My fingers trembled against the sharp stone, my legs aching from tension and cold, but I made it. The ledge was wide enough for us to crouch. Our lights reached further up here. That's when I saw it. A shape just outside the cone of our beams. It was too tall. That was my first thought. Not like a person. Like someone had been stretched upright, arms long, joints sharp, body so thin you could see where the ribs nearly pierced the skin. Its back was turned, pale, scabbed flesh stretched tight over its frame. Its head scraped the ceiling, and it was listening. One long arm curled out and touched the wall, claw tips dragging across it gently, like it was feeling vibrations through the stone. My breath caught and it froze. No sound, no movement. Then its head twisted, not turned, twisted, the neck bending like a broken branch, until one sunken, pupilless socket faced our direction. It didn't blink. It didn't move. Zoe made a noise. Something between a whimper and a choked breath, and I grabbed her mouth just in time. The thing tilted its head, its other hand flexed. Claws like carved antler tips scraped together, click, click, click. Then it sank back into the dark, not walking, melting. The way it moved made me feel wrong inside, like gravity didn't apply to it the same way. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. We sat there for what felt like an hour. Maybe it was minutes. Time felt fake down there. Zoe finally leaned in. Her voice was so quiet I barely heard her. "I don't think we found the cave. I think it wanted us to find it." That thought didn't feel paranoid. It felt true. The walls were grooved. The air was still. The bones were arranged. This wasn't some forgotten tunnel. It was a trap, baited with something only the desperate or curious would follow. I pulled out the backup flashlight and checked our gear. Still had a flare, half a bottle of water, no rope, one knife. We couldn't stay up here. Whatever that thing was, it knew now. We had to move. I started to climb back down when I saw something strange in the rock below. Thin lines in the stone that looked too symmetrical, almost like script. Not in English, not anything I recognized. Dozens of little carvings etched into the ledge just below where we sat, each one a perfect copy of the last. Zoe saw them too. That looks like the markings near the... She stopped herself near the bone bundle. We both knew it. Below us, the breathing started again, but this time it wasn't steady, it was excited. I told Zoe to stay. Don't move, don't make noise, don't shine your light unless you hear me call for you. She didn't argue, just nodded with that hollow, hunted look. Her hands gripped the rock until her knuckles went white. I climbed down from the ledge and slipped into the corridor on the far side, one we hadn't seen before. It felt older than the rest. The walls here were darker, like the stone itself had been scorched. Not from fire, from time, or something older than time. My boots crunched something brittle beneath them. I didn't look down. The deeper I moved, the warmer it got. Not physically, that's not the right word. It was like the space-remembered heat, a stale, decaying warmth that stuck to your skin like grease. I turned a corner and found another chamber. This one was smaller, oval-shaped. The walls weren't stone anymore, at least not naturally. They were carved into reliefs, figures I didn't recognize, arranged in circles, each with their heads bent toward the center. In the middle of the room was a pit. I don't know how deep it went. My light couldn't reach the bottom, but I could hear it. Something moving down there, slow, wet, rhythmic. It didn't echo. I backed out before whatever was down there noticed me. When I returned to the ledge, Zoe was gone. No blood, no drag marks, no scuffle, just gone. Except, there was a new bone bundle, hanging from the rock just below where we had been sitting. Fresh, not skeletal, not cleaned. Something wet still clung to the twine holding it together. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I couldn't. My body locked up, my mind flooded with one thought that repeated over and over. It took her. My flashlight flickered, not out, just dimmed, the way a dying memory does in the back of your mind when something older pushes forward. I ran. I don't remember the path I took, only that the cave shifted around me. The same hallway split and doubled back. I saw my own footprints over and over again, and then I didn't. There were no footprints, no dust, just smooth stone as if nothing and no one had ever walked there before. When I finally collapsed, I was staring up at a patch of sky. Pale morning light filtered through a hole barely large enough to crawl through. Roots hung like fingers. I pulled myself out with everything I had left. I don't remember how I got back to the car, or how I drove. I woke up in my apartment 2 days later, dehydrated and covered in scrapes. Zoe's things were still in the trunk. She's never been reported missing, no records, no digital footprint. It's like she was erased the moment we stepped into that place. Except, yesterday someone slid something under my door. A strip of pale leather tied around a bundle of hair. Zoe's. I recognized the braid. There were markings burned into the leather, same as the carvings in that cave. I've spent hours trying to match them to anything. Runic scripts, tribal symbology, ancient languages. Nothing matches exactly, but one symbol keeps showing up. It looks like a figure bent backward over a ring of thorns. Sometimes it's drawn with antlers, sometimes it has no face, sometimes it looks like it's smiling. I'm not posting this for clout. I don't care if anyone believes me. I'm posting it because I found something else burned into the inside of the leather. Not in ancient script, in English. 5 words, you were meant to watch. I haven't slept since, and I'm not sure I should, because sometimes just before dawn I hear breathing in the walls. Dad was drunk again. Rain swept over my windshield like waves over a beach as I drove him home from yet another bar where he'd made a fool of himself. He wasn't the drunken brawler type, no, he was a crier. He'd sit at the bar with his head on the table and just start sobbing, wailing, bringing down the whole mood of the place. Even now he shifted between crying and sniffling while staring out the passenger window and half-conscious states where he couldn't muster the mental coherence to even register such complex emotions. At one point he even leaned over the center console and tried to hug me, almost making me jerk the steering wheel. Dad, no, Christ, I'm trying to drive here. I snapped at him. Keep on your half of the car or I'm pulling over. Like a loyal dog, he recognized the tone of my words even if not their meaning, and shrunk back sheepishly. Since I was in elementary school, people told me I was remarkably mature for my age, but you kind of have to be when you're forced to act like the parent of the family. The road traveled parallel to our sole local river, the one the school kids all called the Devil's Gutter. gutter. It snaked in and out of sight behind the tree line, as if it liked to taunt every driver that passed. The thing was evil, I knew, but I couldn't help but feel a certain nostalgic fondness for it. It was the only thing offering any sense of danger and mystique to what would have otherwise been the least interesting small town in the country. From a glance it seemed mild, shallow, and narrow enough to make it across with a leap. There was no way of telling that it was actually hundreds of feet deep, that the undercurrent was stronger than an Olympic swimmer could withstand, that the banks were undercut and impossible to climb back up once you were in, that the carbonated water had intricately carved networks of hundreds of channels and caves deep into the limestone. Misjudge your leap and you'd be seized by the undercurrent, dashed against the rocks, plunged deep into some dark cave within which your body would be preserved forever, pinned to a wall or ceiling of stone like some macabre decoration. The gutter features in our every folk tale and ghost story. When I was a kid, we liked to tell the tale of old Bart O'Neill, a 19th century prospector whose cat was apparently very popular with the neighborhood toms. Every time she'd get knocked up, it was said, he'd gather up the kittens into a burlap sack and toss them all into the devil's gutter. At least, and this was when whoever was telling the story would lower their voice to a whisper, until they found his body in his bed, shredded by hundreds of small claws. His eyes had been clawed out, his fingers bitten off like carrots, his rib cage torn open, and within his chest the police found dozens of tiny poops. That's right, according to legend, the spectral kittens had used his chest cavity as a litter box. That was all made up, of course, the crude invention of imaginative schoolboys. But I have looked through old newspapers and found that someone named Bart O'Neill really did disappear from town a long while ago. No gory details, just up and vanished. The only oddity I noticed was that when his cat was found still locked up in a cage in his shed a week after his disappearance, it was well fed, as if somebody had been sneaking in and caring for it. See, this is why I hate taking this road. With every glimpse of that river, my mind always wanders, back to old memories, terrible memories, ones that would have been better left forgotten. It ignites a fire in me, a sort of morbid curiosity I've come to dread. But then Dad broke my line of thought with a long, obnoxiously loud groan, and then I was thinking of the first time I had him in my passenger seat when I was some anxiety-ridden kid, no older than 15, didn't even have my driver's license yet, my hands shaking late that New Year's night as I struggled to dodge all the other drunk morons swerving all over the road. New Year's was always the worst night for him. This would have been our anniversary, he was groaning. It would have been our 15th. I got over what happened to Mom over a decade ago. Why couldn't he? We aren't the only people who've experienced loss anyway. When I was growing up, the whole town mourned the death of Annabelle, captain of our high school cheerleading squad. She had tried to jump the gutter and even cleared it, but there'd just been rain and the muddy opposite bank gave way beneath her feet and she went right in. Crazy thing was, 15 minutes later, they got a ping from some SOS beacon her mother had made her wear. They took this as proof she'd made it out alive but injured and triggered a frantic search of the surrounding area, with no luck. There were rumors, however improbable, that she'd found her way into an air pocket somewhere in that limestone cave system, just close enough to the surface that just one of her desperate calls for help managed to make it through. Sometimes I picture her down there, in a kind of darkness I could not fathom, struggling to keep her head above the water. I wonder if she knew that surrounding her, somewhere in the dark, were the corpses of those who had been pulled into those caves before her. I picture a gaunt, bleached hand brushing her ankle as those currents carry one by. I imagine her crowded on all sides by the gaunt, empty eyes of the people who'd found their way into that air pocket before her and never found their way out. Maybe it was for the best that she would have been in complete darkness. There my mind went again. I'd gotten another glimpse of the river and couldn't help but imagine Anna down there, as if her eyes were looking up at me from beneath those blackened waters. I tried to turn up the radio to take my mind off it and to drown out Dad's moaning and sobbing, but he grunted as if the very sound offended him and drunkenly pawed at the dashboard until he turned it back off. I already knew what he'll say tomorrow. "I've let you down," he'd say, head down like a dog caught peeing on the carpet. "I've never been the father I should have been, and it'll all be very genuine and very sincere and very, very temporary. I've even helped pay for his rehab once. He'd been found choked half to death on his own vomit. This is a wake-up call," he'd said. "I'm finally ready to be the dad you've always needed me to be." A few grand seemed like a small price to pay to have my dad back. And indeed, for a few months of sobriety, he was the best dad on earth, the best I ever could have asked for. And then came New Year's again, and it was suddenly like none of it ever happened. My eyes glimpsed a cross set up along the gutter, a bouquet left at its base. I knew exactly who it was for. When I was in 4th grade, Bethany, a little girl who went to the same school as me, was swallowed up by the gutter. gutter. Her father was the only one who witnessed the accident, and there'd been some suspicious circumstances. I don't really remember, something about marital issues, custody, that sort of thing. Point was, everybody suspected him. But what proof did we have? The gutter never parts with its secrets. 3 years or so later, her dad just up and vanished too. Nobody thought much of it at first. Everyone assumed he got tired of the side eyes and just skipped town. But then, months after everyone had forgotten the whole business, someone started sending around a voicemail he'd apparently sent out at 3 in the morning, the night he disappeared. It had apparently been sent to some random coworker from his contacts list. An accident, clearly. The first minute or two just consisted of the sort of rustling you'd expect from a pocket dial, so they hadn't thought much of it. It hadn't been until their curiosity drove them to investigate deeper that they realized they could hear the dad's heavy, belabored breathing, and the sounds of twigs and leaves crackling beneath his feet, as if he were wandering through the middle of the woods. Moreover, off in the distance, they could hear another voice. The faint voice of a little girl, bubbly and giggling, like they were playing a game. "Daddy," the voice kept crying out into the night. "Daddy, where are you?" They noticed too that you couldn't hear any crickets or birds or anything else you'd expect out in the forest at night. Everything was dead silent, like all the creatures of the woods sensed the presence of a predator. The dad's breathing grew heavier and more panicked whenever the voice grew louder, nearer, but it remained stifled, as if he was desperately trying to keep quiet, remain unnoticed. Eventually she was so close that you could hear her little footsteps in the leaves, and the dad didn't even dare to breathe. And then, the sound of branches being parted, the father's gasp, and that little voice laughing and declaring in a sing-song tone. And at that exact moment, the voicemail reached its time limit. The cop's official line was that it was a fake, just some audio doctored up by bored teenagers to feed into the sensationalized mythology of the Devil's Gutter. But Bethany's remaining relatives swore up and down that they recognized that giggly little voice, that it was unmistakable. Lost in thought, I blinked, and somehow in that instant, a woman appeared in the middle of the road. I can't remember the next few seconds. It was as if I'd time traveled. One moment I was driving along, and the next I was stuck in a muddy ditch on the roadside. The hood just inches away from an oak tree sturdy enough to have bisected my car, and Dad was screaming like a madman, incoherently at first, but then congealing into a name. Jessica. He was screaming out for Mom, I realized. Jessica. And as he screamed, he threw open the passenger side door and tore off into the woods with a drunken stumble. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, the woman was still standing there in the road, a vague silhouette barely illuminated by whatever moonlight broke through the storm. But when I looked back with my own eyes, she was gone. I cursed like a sailor as I took off into the storm, blindly in the direction I thought my dad had went. My heart was in my throat. We were so close to the gutter. In his state, he could so easily fall in, become just another name in its long list, another creepy story to tell on school playgrounds. But then it became clear I was in the same danger. The storm was picking up rapidly, sideways rain blasted my eyes, wind tugging at the trees by their roots. Yet somehow, stupidly, what terrified me most was the prospect that, while stumbling through those darkened woods, I might hear a little girl's voice off in the distance shouting, "Daddy." Suddenly, I froze in place. I realized I could hear the bubbling and crashing of the gutter's current, even over the storm. It must be so close. I tried to look for it, but the rain seared my eyes whenever I was not covering them with an arm. I was too terrified to take a step in any direction, but the storm took action for me, by sweeping away the mud beneath my feet. Anna's fate flashed in my mind, the muddy bank giving way. My death wasn't even going to be original. I thrashed and floundered, feeling the earth seem to envelop me from below, like a massive creature pulling me into its gullet. Through sheer luck, my random grabs caught purchase. A thick, sturdy tree root was all that saved me from the waters below, and I clung to it with every scrap of strength I had, even as the rain left it soaked and slippery. I managed to hold on for a while, with no way back up but unwilling to let go of my only lifeline. And then I felt a cold hand wrap around my ankle. My body tensed with such horror that I lost my grip in an instant, and those cruel waters had me. They seemed to toy with me for a while, spinning me about under the surface as I curled up into the fetal position. The shock of the frigid cold caused me to suck down a breath instinctively, filling my lungs with water. As I scratched at my chest, my eyes opened for just a split second. On either side of me were those thick limestone walls, pockmarked with the black abysses that were caves, and that limestone led down below, far below, disappearing into that infinite, inky blackness beneath me. The experts' guesses must have been wrong. The gutter couldn't just be a few hundred feet deep, it had to be a mile at the very least. Just looking down into that darkness, I felt the same sense of vertigo as I'd felt looking down from the roof of the Empire State Building. That, and an overwhelming sense of things looking up at me, staring back. It reminded me of joining the theater group as a kid, standing on a stage for the first time and realizing that there were over 100 pairs of eyes on me, watching me, expecting a performance. Except this time, I knew they were here to watch me die, watch me become one of them, sink down far below the surface and join them in all that darkness, never to see sunlight again, except vaguely through the surface of the water, miles above my new home. But even that didn't terrify me quite as much as the prospect of landing in one of those caves, even as the undercurrent bashed me savagely against rocks, and my lungs cried for air. My only focus was avoiding them. I swear I could see bloated arms and grasping hands reaching out from the dark of each cave, grasping for me as I passed by, as if each occupant was lonely, desperate for a companion in their eternal resting places. Suddenly, the current bashed my head against a rock, and from then everything was abstract and fuzzy. I could only muster a single coherent thought. Please, not here, it went. Don't let me die here. Somehow I knew that if I died beneath these waters, my soul would never break the surface. As if to answer my prayer, a pair of arms settled around me. Not the cold, grasping claws reaching from the caves, but something warm and comfortable, embracing me, cradling me close in a way that told me everything would be okay. Again, the next few seconds were a blur. I have no explanation for how I ended up back on the shore, shivering from the freezing waters and hacking, retching, emptying the water from my lungs upon the mud. All I know is when I looked up, a bolt of lightning briefly illuminated the stone memorial looming above me, upon which read, "In love and memory of Jessica Whitaker." I know everything about the mythology of the Devil's Gutter because I was part of it. My family is one of the ones the school kids whisper about, the ones they make up wild stories and creepy theories about. Terminal cancer, they'd say around campfires, that was so horribly painful that not even the morphine could do anything for her. She'd been a painter, you know, always drawing portraits of the gutter. She was the only person who thought it was beautiful, not evil. So the legend goes she begged her husband, "Please take me to the river. Let me become part of it. I don't want to hurt anymore." They say that they did it on their anniversary, New Year's Day. I heard a long choking rasp. For a moment I was almost relieved. I thought it was another of my father's drunken groans. Then I realized it was coming from the river itself. I turned and beheld a dozen hands reaching out over the side of the banks, unnameable things pulling themselves up from the waters. I only caught vague glimpses of the crawling, groaning creatures, briefly illuminated by the lightning. Their skins were bleached white and transparent, looking like road maps made of veins and arteries stretched taut over gray muscles and jagged ribs and putrid organs. Many were missing legs, arms, even heads. Others were more ancient still, mummified strands of flesh seemingly loosely stitched to the crumbling remains of a skeletal structure. All seemed to be looking right at me, even though none of them had any eyes to speak of, only empty black sockets. They were crawling forwards with horrid determination. Once the gutter had taken you into its waters, laid its claim to you, it never wanted to let you go. They were only coming to retrieve what they were owed. I tried to crawl away through the mud, but it felt like crawling in a bad dream. It felt like the very planet was turning sideways, gravity itself guiding me back towards the river. Then a figure burst through the woods, large and heavy set. My father. He stumbled into the middle of the crowd of the dead, waving his arms, trying to seize their attention. Take me, not them, take me. He was screaming like a man possessed, but they didn't seem to even notice him. They were dead set on me, blind to the rest of the world. Then he turned to the lake and my eyes followed his gaze to the woman from the road. Now her silhouette was standing in the middle of the river, seeming to hover a few inches above the water, her dress billowing in the wind. "Jessica, take me, tell them to take me." He let out a primal, raw scream, one that must have torn his throat to shreds. "I don't want to hurt anymore." She calmly beckoned him with a finger, and in that moment he knew what he had to do. He didn't even hesitate. He went sliding down the bank, and for a moment he seemed to stand upon those bubbling, surging waters just like she did. His arms were stretched wide as he stumbled forward, as if ready to embrace her. And then I blinked and they were gone. So too disappeared that legion of the dead. It seemed like they'd accepted the trade, one soul for another. The gutter always took its due. It would have been easy to tell everyone that my dad had just stumbled stupidly into the gutters during another of his drunken stupors, but I wanted people to remember his sacrifice. I weaved some tale of me falling in, and him jumping in after me and hoisting me out, even at the cost of his own life. It didn't make a lot of sense, I must admit, and some people even suspected me for a while, but eventually everybody just accepted the idea of him being a hero in his last moments, getting some redemption in the last. People like when stories get wrapped up in neat little bows. Sometimes I still dream about the two of them, floating in the center of some underwater cave chamber, yet somehow illuminated by moonlight, and by the walls of the chamber all lined with glowing pinprick white eyes like stars in the sky. Dead but not dead, the current still flowing about them, animating them like marionettes, spinning them around each other, my mother in my father's arms like a waltz, the way they were on their wedding day, dancing on and on forever before their audience of the dead. I wasn't allowed to talk to the boy with wings, my brother, but I wasn't permitted to call him that anymore. My mother said he was supposed to be an angel, except I knew what angels looked like, the idealized versions from movies as well as the biblically accurate ones. He was more like a crow, a hideous bird-like creature resembling the body of a male adolescent college student spliced with a diseased bird. My brother didn't even have a name. To my parents, he was like a stray cat who picked them. They didn't love him or want him in the house. On the flip side, he was also an angel, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to observe something that defied the laws of physics, with power like no other. He, like my sister, was a lost child of the sky, those ethereal beings who had fallen thousands of years ago and decided to walk on Earth. He had saved my life as a baby. I was so young that I don't remember it, but Mom likes to remind me every year on my birthday that I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for the angels in our attic, my adopted brother and sister. I was born severely premature with only a small chance of surviving one night. Mom said she prayed endlessly, begging for a miracle, and it was visited by the two beings who gave me life through their divine power. When I pulled through, Mom begged them to stay and watch over me until I was old enough to fend for myself. If I think back to my earliest memory, it's the angels babysitting and watching over me. Back then, they actually looked cherubic, or maybe that's just how I remember them. My brother bore huge white wings, almost like a swan, while my sisters were more grayish. They used to smile and giggle, and for a while we were actual siblings. But as I grew up, I saw less of them. Mom would drag them away while we were in the middle of some shenanigans, and I wouldn't see them for days, sometimes weeks. I thought the angels had finally flown away back home. I was sad, I guess. I was just a little kid and my older siblings had vanished. When I started hearing noises upstairs, the familiar sound of their wings scraping against wooden floorboards and the crumbling ceiling, Mom and Dad told me my siblings were now inside the attic. It was too dangerous for them, so they were safe upstairs, which meant no more playing with them and especially no more mentioning them to family members and friends. Mom was very strict with me. They're magical beings, Nini, she told me one night before bed. There's a lot of bad people out there who will want your brother and sister for bad things, so we need to keep quiet about them, alright? I went to school the next day and drew a picture of the two of them playing with me. At the end of class, my teacher gently pulled me aside. Am I in trouble? I asked, and she laughed, gesturing for me to sit down. No, you're not in trouble. I just want to talk about the art you made during class. I shuffled on my chair, well aware of my promise to Mom. I wasn't allowed to talk about the angels in the attic. This is a very pretty drawing, Nini. My teacher said, holding it up. Are they angels? I nodded excitedly. They're my brother and sister. Her eyes darkened. She shuffled back on her chair. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean... No, my siblings are alive, I said. They're angels and they live in the attic. I remember her smile was a little too big. She leaned forward, plucking my drawing from my hands. Do they have names? No, I told her matter-of-factly. They're not allowed names. Her smile faltered slightly. What do you mean they're not allowed names, sweetie? Mrs. J was my favorite teacher usually, but I could already sense her growing unease. I pretended not to see her digging her nails into my drawing. I told her exactly what Mom told me. Because they're angels, I said, giggling. They don't need human names. Mrs. J nodded, handing me back my drawing. Sweetie, I know I'm not supposed to ask this. I'll probably get in trouble, so can we keep this between you and me? I nodded, my stomach twisting into knots. Maybe I had said the wrong thing. Okay. When my teacher leaned closer, her expression darkened significantly. Let me back up a couple months. Mrs. J had been absent for a while. She used to be smiley and colorful, always excited to teach us. But she came back weeks later, distant and somehow hollow. Her smiles were forced, and even then, sitting in front of me wearing a giant grin, I could tell my teacher was distraught. I felt guilty that my siblings were angels and could probably heal her pain. Mom's Mom's rules would never allow that. Nini, would you be able to tell me what these angels look like? I shrugged. Well, they have wings. No, Nini, Mrs. J stabbed at the drawing, running her index across my sister's stick person face. I had drawn her thick red hair in a fuzzy crayoned blur, and my brother's curls in a brown cloud. I never saw their halos, but I'd drawn them above their heads anyway, along with large feather-like wings. What do these angels look like? I was going to reply, but then Mom poked her head inside. Nini, it's time to go home, honey. She smiled at my teacher, who, to my surprise, stuffed the drawing in her pocket. Mom definitely saw her attempt to hide my picture. I saw her demeanor stiffen slightly, her arms already defensively crossing over her chest. Mrs. J, is there a problem? My teacher jumped to her feet, faking her smile once again. I was just talking to Nini about her homework. Mom nodded slowly, maintaining her expression. I'm sorry about your children. She cleared her throat. They were so young. They're my babies, my teacher's voice splintered. I'm sure you understand a mother's grief. Please excuse me. I'm here if you want to talk, Mom said. We all know Adam liked to dabble with recreational drugs. Mrs. J's smile faltered, and I saw the switch from my teacher to a parent. I don't need your pity, she spat. If I'm honest with you, if I hear one more person telling me everything is going to be okay, I am going to lose my mind. Thank you, but I don't want your sorry. I don't want your condolences. Her voice broke, and I immediately wanted to give her a hug. I watched my teacher open up my laptop, ostensibly ignoring my mother. If you're going to stand there and waste my time, I suggest you leave. Mrs. J caught my eye, her lips curling into a scowl. Mrs. J pulled out my drawing, slapping it on the desk. Your daughter has an interesting imagination. Mom's eyes widened as she took the drawing. She wrapped her hand around my wrist and gently pulled me from the room. When we were in the car on the way home, I asked why my teacher was so upset. Mom didn't reply for a long time, leaving me drowning in uncomfortable silence. I knew she had the drawing. I knew I was in trouble. I expected her to lecture me, but instead she bought me chocolate ice cream from a drive-thru. While I was eating it, she cleared her throat. Mrs. J lost her children, Mom said, her fingers tightening around the wheel. She wants, no, craves a miracle, and you gave her hope with your drawing. Mom pulled it from her pocket and, to my horror, tore it up and threw it out of the window. I watched it land in a puddle. My brother's crayon smile disappeared under the murky water. Nini, did you tell Mrs. J about your brother and sister? I didn't answer, ice cream creeping back up my throat. Nini, Mom said again. I shook my head. No, I lied, and when she gave me the look, I caved. I just said there are angels living in the attic. Mom nodded slowly. Did you say they were real angels? No. Did she ask what they looked like? I wasn't a fan of the interrogation, my eyes swimming with tears. I don't know, I mumbled. No, she just liked my drawing. Mom curled her lip. You're absolutely sure, Nina, because if you're lying, bad people will come and take your siblings. She only called me Nina when I was in trouble. Yes. Mom leaned back into her seat, breathing out a sigh of relief. That's good, she whispered. I flinched when she turned to me, grasping my hands and squeezing them tight. Because we can't have anyone taking them away, okay? They're your angels, sweetheart. Following that day, I wasn't allowed to even mention the angels in our attic. If I did, either intentionally or accidentally slipping up, I was promptly sent to my room. The problem was, no matter how many times I was told not to talk about them or completely ignore their existence, I refused. These two, whether angels or not, were still my brother and sister. I told my aunt about them when I was maybe 10, during Thanksgiving dinner. It was a slip of the tongue. She thought I was joking. We were all sharing our wishes for the upcoming year, so I had held up my glass of juice, copying my parents' toast, and declared, I wish I could see my brother and sister who are in the attic again. Aunt Jules spluttered on her own wine, and I caught the look she shot my mother. She already had tomato cheeks, giggling a little too much for an adult woman. Mom had already set several glasses of water in front of her, but she was ignoring all of them. Frida, she chuckled, wiggling her eyebrows. Is there anything you should tell me? Mom slowly lowered her own glass, her lips pressed to the rim. Jules, you know my daughter has an overactive imagination. They're more like imaginary friends. Aunt Jules straightened in her seat suddenly, her smile fading. That's not what I wanted to talk about. She turned to me, color bleeding from her cheeks. Nini, why don't you go upstairs to your room? I need to talk to your mother. No, it's okay. I'm almost an adult too. I smiled at my aunt. Nina, you are 8 years old, Dad grumbled, inhaling piles of mashed potato. I didn't move, staying stubbornly still. I figured if I stayed as still as possible, the adults might not notice it was past my bedtime. Nina, Mom's tone was a warning. Go upstairs. I reluctantly dragged myself upstairs. When I tried to listen in on the conversation, hiding on the stairs, Dad picked me up and carried me all the way up to my room and tucked me into bed. I thought I could stay awake and strain my ears to listen to the conversation, but I fell asleep. I was woken by something wet trickling down my face. Opening my eyes, I found myself staring at a single puddle of red pooling from my ceiling. I sat up, swiping my fingers down my face. Blood. When a lone feather hit my cheek, I jumped out of bed, my heart hammering. Instead of calling for my parents, I grabbed my pink chair from my dressing table and positioned it below the red stain. I hopped onto it, standing on my tiptoes and dragging my fingers across scarlet. I risked knocking 3 times. To my surprise, there was a response. 2 single knocks. Are you okay? I asked, pressing my face to the ceiling so they could hear my voice. Another single knock, number something ice cold slithered down my spine. I tried again. Are you hurt? Yes, his voice was a soft sob. I jumped, almost toppling off of the chair, hearing my brother's strained voice. When I really listened, pushing all of the sound out of my head, the light hum of my bedroom light, and my parents downstairs arguing with my aunt, his cries splintered through the silence. I jumped off the chair and almost immediately heard the sound of his movements, his wings scraping the floor. Nini. I imagined him pressing his face against the floor. What are you doing? I got all the way to the door, my fingers wrapped around the ornate handle. I'm telling Mom you're hurt, I said. You need help. Wait, don't. The urgency in his tone stopped me dead in my tracks. It's just a broken wing, he whispered. I'm okay, it will heal. I didn't know what to do, so I stayed with him, balanced on my chair, for hours. I told him stories from my favorite books, and he seemed to like them. He even knew the characters' names before I said them. When I was getting sleepy, I dragged a blanket from my bed and slumped into the chair. What's your name? I don't know, he said after an uncomfortable pause. Mom said angels don't have names, I said. No, correct. Okay, so can I name you? I heard the sound of him rolling onto his side. Sure. Simba, I declared, glancing at my stuffed lion perched on my pillows. He chuckled, and I realized I had never heard an angel laugh before. It sounded just like mine. That's not a proper name. Peter. I was frowning at my scrappy copy of Narnia. Nah, he sighed. I don't think that's me. I picked up a random book, flicking through it. Okay then, how about Jude? Jude, the angel murmured, wallowing the name around his mouth. I like it. I nodded excitedly. What about our sister? Lily. The small squeak came from the angel girl herself. I like the name Lily, she whispered. I felt proud of finally naming them, and they started to feel more like siblings to me. I started sneaking food up to the attic, just salted crackers at first, and holy water from my mother's fountain. But angels are hungry and had a particular liking for snacks and junk food. Initially, I shoved the food through the cracks in the floorboards to avoid getting caught, but then I grew brave and started hauling my old Nintendo DS and an ancient game of Monopoly up there. I had to squeeze myself through a suffocating gap after climbing up a wobbly wooden ladder and carefully removing several floodboards so I could pull myself through. Once I was through though, eagerly holding snacks and games, my eyes adjusted to surroundings, my DS slipping through my fingers. I had never been inside the attic before. When I questioned what was inside, I was told it was for storage, except the storage room smelled of antiseptic. Could you put the floorboards back? Jude's shuddery voice startled me. I'm cold. The 2 figures slumped against the wall sent my heart into my throat. Jude and Lily. I hadn't seen them since I was a child, since they were dragged away from me when I was playing. I had grown up with their voices bleeding through my ceiling and imagined them much older, but they were still the same age. Exactly the same age. College kids, or maybe older, early 20s. The same angels who played with me when I was a child. The 2 of them were pale, gaunt in the face, almost skeletal. I always thought their wings were beautiful and swan-like, majestic, otherworldly, but this wasn't what I remembered. I could feel my breaths growing heavy, a shiver creeping down my spine. I wasn't even sure I was looking at an angel at all. Their wings were tattered and shredded, barely attached to their backs, heavy and very clearly weighing them down. When I was a kid, I distinctly remember my brother's wings as perfect. There was no explanation why they were there or how. The explanation was that they were angels, and human laws didn't apply to them. them. However, what I was seeing did have an explanation. Jude's wings weren't beautiful, unexplained phenomenons magically sprouting from his back. In the haunting white light buzzing above me, I could see exactly where his naked spine protruded from his skin, splitting in two, where horrific feathered appendages resembling wings blossomed, spliced through a filthy t-shirt. I risked a step toward them, noticing the two of them stiffening up, like I was going to hurt them. Mom lied, that was all I could think. She said they had blankets, food, and books. She said they were happy staying locked away in our attic. The more I had time to think, to wrap my head around what I was seeing, it hit me that this room above our house wasn't a safe place to protect our angels. The light was painful to the eyes, fluorescent and cruel. The walls and ceiling were clinical white, but it was the angels themselves that didn't make sense. Against the backdrop of what felt and looked almost like an operating theater, my siblings looked out of place, bound in cruel chains biting their ankles and wrists, binding them to the walls themselves, to the very foundations keeping the house together. I took another step forward. Something was sticking from my sister's arm, a long plastic tube feeding into her. Closer. I glimpsed rivulets of red beating down Jude's back. Another longer tube, this time filled with clear liquid, sticking directly from the incision carved where his spine split in two. I pretended not to see the metal clamp forced inside bloody slithers of flesh, his wings shuddering, individual feathers trying to contract, trying to spread wide and folded into grotesque flaps. Lily sat awkwardly, her back to the wall, strawberry blonde hair hanging in flickering eyes. I glimpsed one single plastic tube stuck into her arm. She seemed to be in better condition, her wings easily unfurling when she shuffled back, her lips parting. Mom and Dad weren't protecting the angels from the outside, they were experimenting on them. "It's okay," Jude murmured, lightly nudging the girl. "It's just Nini." Lily's weary eyes found mine, half-lidded eyes struggling to stay awake. Slowly, I knelt in front of them, my eyes stinging. I pushed filthy brown hair from my brother's sleepy eyes. Before I could speak though, he weakly gestured to the DS I dropped on the floor. His voice was a slurred mumble, and my gaze shot to the tube cruelly sticking from his spine. "Does that have Mario?" His question took me off guard. I shuffled back, grabbed the DS, swiping dust from the screen. I slid the power on and his eyes lit up. No, I held it up so he could see the screen. "But I do have Nintendogs." Jude grinned, though I wasn't expecting to see sharp incisors jutting from his gums. "Sounds fun." He held out his chained wrists. "Do you want to play?" I had so many questions, but at that moment, looking at the creases in my brother's expression while he was in pain, I swallowed my words. I played with them until the sky turned dark. When I was packing up, I couldn't resist moving towards, my heart jumping in my chest. I tried to pull the tube from his spine, and his wings jerked, his eyes widening. "Don't." He snarled like an animal, and I stood paralyzed. Jude shuffled away, his wings twitching, struggling under the clamp. His breaths came out in sharp pants, his fingernails almost like claws dragging across the wooden boards. "Don't touch me," he spat. "Do you understand?" I didn't move, and his expression softened, his teeth retracting. "I'm sorry," he said. "It just hurts." I finished for him, choking on my own sob. "My mom and dad are hurting you." Jude didn't reply for a moment before his head jerked up. "Do you remember that one time when you wanted to fly? You jumped off of the bunk bed and broke your arm, and we ran for your mom. We love you and we care about you, but we need help now too." I nodded. "Do you have a paper and pen?" I did. I brought a whole coloring pad up for drawing. I nodded, handing him a blank piece of paper and a crayon. Jude scribbled a number and handed it to me. "Can you call this number?" he whispered. I nodded. "Why? Is it like part of your job as an angel?" His expression furrowed, but he replaced confusion with a smile. "Yeah, it's a job." He leaned back, wincing when his wings brushed against the ceiling, visibly in pain. "I've been here for so long protecting you, I need to check up on all the other children." "Jude," Lily grumbled, nudging him when he rolled his eyes. "Knock it off." "Why?" His smile was bitter. "Aren't we just doing our jobs?" That night, I left the attic with a mission, feeling optimistic. I was going to call the special angel number and help my brother do his job. Mom was making dinner, so it was easy to distract her. I made a huge deal about dessert, and when she was grumbling to herself, pulling ingredients for cookies from the cupboard, I swiped my mother's phone from her purse, locked myself in the bathroom, and dialed the number. I was so excited, my fingers were all clammy. The dial tone sounded in my ear, before the sound of someone picking it up. Hello? Before I could speak, Mom was unlocking the door, pulling her phone from my grasp. Nini, what are you doing? She demanded, apologizing to the recipient. Yes, hello, I'm so sorry my daughter accidentally called you. She shot me the dagger eyes before walking away, her phone to her ear. No, I have no idea how she got your number. Have a great night. Mom didn't get mad. Instead, she made me cookies. I was nibbling on a chocolate one when she leaned against the counter, arms folded. Nini, I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to tell the truth. I was doing a job, I said, dipping my cookies in fondant. Her eyebrows furrowed. You were doing a job? I nodded. One of the angels gave me an angel number so I could do his job for him. Mom's lip curled. Okay then, can I have the angel number? When I hesitated, she sighed. Nini, I'm sure he would rather an adult was doing his job for him. She held out her hand. Sweetie, I don't want to ask you again. I handed it over, words suddenly choking from my mouth. Why are you hurting them? Mom looked taken aback, her eyes widening. Nini, why on earth would you think we are hurting them? I saw them, I said, my voice breaking. You're doing bad things to their wings. Mom hugged me and I found myself splintering apart, burying my head in her chest. Nina, sweetie, you are very, very wrong, she whispered, wrapping her arms around me. They're sick, Mom murmured into my shoulder, running her fingers through my hair. When they brought you back to life as a child, they were so weak, so they couldn't fly away. We didn't tell you because we didn't want to scare you. I nodded, squeezing my mother to my chest. It all made sense. They were fixing their wings. Your father and I have been trying to save them, she hummed. Of course, with them being so powerful, we have no choice but to take extra measures, which, yes, include chaining them up. She pulled away from the hug, wiping away my tears. Nina, you need to understand that they are extraordinarily powerful, and only chains soaked in holy water will hold them. When they were younger, they were weaker and less destructive, but as you saw, they are growing stronger every day. I felt a pain in my chest. Then they'll fly away, I whispered. Mom pursed her lips, but nodded, giving me another cookie. Then they'll fly away. I didn't visit the angels for a while after that. I think part of me was scared of them, scared of their destructive power. But then I missed them. So I grabbed snacks from the kitchen, a handful of DS games I knew Jude would like, and crept out of my room, making a beeline towards the attic. Except when I climbed the wobbly stairs, the loose floorboards leading to the attic had all been replaced. I had an idea to tell them by knocking on my ceiling. But when I came home from school, running up to my room, my bedroom was out of bounds. We're redecorating, Mom smiled brightly. For now, you'll be sleeping in our room. I had no way to contact them. When my room was finished, I had a brand new ceiling. I knocked all night, balancing on my chair, waiting for a response. I never got one. I did hear them though. In the middle of the night, their pain screams bled through my walls, keeping me awake. I saw their blood seeping through the walls, the ceiling, stray feathers choking the air, as if our house felt their agony. When I slipped out of bed, I stepped on tattered pieces of their wings, pricking my bare feet. I ran the faucet to wash my face, but instead, blood ran thick, staining porcelain. They must have been sick enough to almost feel human. I heard their wails, their pleads for death, and half wondered if they were asking their father, God. Mom told me over breakfast that the angels were deathly ill. She told me to pray for them, and I did, bent over my frosted flakes. I prayed their father would hear them and save them, like they saved me. Eventually, their cries stopped. Dad said they were finally stable, and my mother broke down in tears. When I hit my tweens, then my teens, I forgot about them. I was still aware of the sick angels in my attic, but being a teenager, I guess I was more interested in experimenting with my sexuality and spending time with friends. But that didn't mean they didn't exist. When I was 18, I left for college, but I still visited for the holidays. I finally saw them again. It was hard to ignore the boy with tattered white wings jutting out from his spine and the slit in his shirt as he dragged himself downstairs, sneaking into our refrigerator. I wasn't sure what this version of Jude was. He was different from the one I met in the attic. That boy still resembled a human, still felt pain. This guy had talon-like fingernails and a twisted spine protruding from his back, making him appear more bird-like, but his wings were bigger, his spine hidden by a blood-drenched shirt clinging to him. He was always hunched over, moving slowly, his once human features obscured by thick dark hair covering his eyes. I tried to ignore the grime stuck between his toes and the scarlet trail from the refrigerator to the door. He didn't even acknowledge me. me, sticking his face directly into a frosted cake my mother made. I watched, mesmerized and maybe a little disgusted, as he chewed through the cake, whipped his head up, swallowing it down, exactly the way I'd see a crow eating bread. When his eyes did find me, they were beady and wrong, almost vacant. He ignored me, standing on his tiptoes to sniff around in the cupboard. Jude. I found myself saying his name and it felt and sounded foreign. He didn't respond, ripping open a bag of candy bars. He was ravaging a Snickers bar when I turned to him, swallowing down bile. Jude's sickness really had turned him from an angel into something else. His body was more of a grotesque contortion of angel and human. His bones jutted out in weird places, his wings a lot better and sturdier, but much sharper, every individual as sharp as a needlepoint. How old are you? I asked casually. I'm almost 19 and you've been 19 for most of my life, but you're also an angel, so that would make you like old. It was a joke. I was hoping he'd retained his humor from when I was a kid. I remembered telling him a joke and he actually laughed, like a real proper laugh. Jude, I said again. He twisted around, chocolate slew dropping down his chin. It hit me when he slowly inclined his head, beady eyes twitching. He couldn't understand me, or at least he was struggling to fully understand me. I noticed his eyes were glued to my lips. He was reading my words. I stood up slowly. Mom and Dad were at the store, so I didn't have much time. If you have wings, why don't you fly away? Jude dragged his twitching body to the door, his arms full of snacks. I didn't expecting him to laugh, one arm whipping out, curled nails gripping the doorway, the other grasping salted chips. His laugh was strange, no longer human, more of a bird-like squawk. Instead of speaking, he saluted me with his candy bar and walked away, still chirping to himself. 2 weeks later, I got a glimpse of Lily. Her wings were larger than her, monstrous gray appendages splitting her spine in two. Lily's clothes were barely clinging to her skeletal frame. She was hunched over, a single chain wrapped around her ankle. She went straight to the kitchen faucet and turned on the stream of water, gulping greedily, her fang-like teeth piercing silver. When she dropped to her knees, weighed down by her wings, I couldn't stand it anymore. I shoved the door open to the patio. Go, I managed to choke out, pointing outside. Fly, I won't tell Mom. I saw her longing to be free, desperation crumpling her attempt at a smile. She nodded, making a beeline for the door. Her wings weren't strong enough, so I grabbed duct tape and reinforced them as much as I could. I pulled off my jacket and threw it over her shoulders, pulling her into a hug. She didn't speak. I don't think she could. Her neck was narrower, more bird-like. I wasn't even sure if she had vocal cords anymore. Go, I said, halfway to the door. I'll go get your brother. With a broken smile, she stepped over the threshold. She was so close to cold air on her skin, sunlight reflecting in wide, hopeful eyes filled with tears. I watched her spread her wings, flying up. There was a knock on the front door and I panicked, shutting the door. Go, I hissed, and hello? Footsteps. They weren't my mother. Frida. The kitchen door flew open, an all too familiar face, followed by a pained shriek. Serena. It took me half a second to realize my old elementary school teacher was standing in the doorway, her frenzied eyes glued to Lily. I watched her take slow steps forward, stumbling, her hands covering her mouth. Serena, she sobbed, oh God, my baby. Her lips started to curl and I felt her scream rooted inside my skull. Her gaze locked onto the girl's wings. What did they do to you? What did they do? Bang. In the time it took for the angel to drop to the ground and her mother following suit, reality slammed into me in an icy wave. Lily hit the patio, scarlet spreading around her. She wasn't an angel. Nina. Mom was in the doorway, a shotgun in her hands. Next to her, Jude stood, his eyes wild, his mouth gagged by my mother's hand. Mom, Jude muffled. His gaze found my teacher crumpled on the floor, his expression contorting, growing feral. He lunged forward, his bird-like cry becoming more human, resembling a child's screech. Mom yanked him back, slamming her hand over his mouth. Mom. I watched, paralyzed, as she turned on him, sticking the gun between his brows. Stay, she spat, running the barrel of the gun down his naked back. Mom saw his sharp glance towards freedom, forcing him into his knees. Move, and I shoot her. She twisted back to Lily, who wasn't moving. He dropped to his knees, slowly raising his hands. Okay, my mother gasped out, so I want to get several things very clear. In 2 strides, she was looming over my elementary school teacher. I watched her stick the barrel of the gun, protruding it into the woman's head and blowing her brains out all over our kitchen floor, seeping scarlet and fleshy pink chunks decorating my shoes. The angels didn't react. Lily lying in her own blood and Jude staring dead-eyed at his mother. I couldn't breathe. I was aware I had thrown up all over myself, but I didn't remember moving, only the thick acidic sludge dripping down my face. You don't have a mother, Mom spat at Jude. You are a fallen angel who dropped from the skies thousands of years ago and now walks the earth. I watched her cradle the boy's face. You saved my daughter. You were my perfect miracle. Mom's eyes were manic, her smile widening. She tightened her grip, forcing him to look at her. Aren't you? He didn't reply, his lip curling. Mom laughed in his face. Adam, you were your mother's worst enemy, she said, spite dripping from every word. Do you know how much it upset her to see her own son hurting himself right in front of her? Her gaze flashed to Lily. Serena was a whore of a woman, she spat. Every day I watched and listened to your mother complain about the two of you. You stole cash for drugs, sold her car, and even used her medication to satisfy your disgusting, filthy habit. Serena was sleeping around and your own father called you a disgrace. Honestly, Adam, I should have left you in that hotel room. She gripped harder, her manicured nails slicing into his skin. Unconscious drooling, a needle sticking from your veins. How pathetic. He cried out sharp, more akin to a crow, trying to jerk from her unyielding grasp. I should have let you destroy your body, let your mother find you unresponsive again. Mom stepped back, admiring him. I gave you wings to save you, she whispered. Dad came through the door, already hauling bleach in a body bag. Mom must have known my teacher was planning to visit. I think this was the point where I was supposed to do something, but I was frozen, standing in pooling blood and splintered pieces of my teacher's skull. Dad hauled the angels back to the attic and I was left with my mother. Grab me a bucket, she said, like disposing of a body was normal. I didn't speak to my mother. Instead, I grabbed my backpack and left the house. I went straight to the sheriff's office and told him directly that I had witnessed a murder and that 2 missing college students were in my parents' attic. I don't think they believed me at first. I shouldn't have led with, I think my mother turned 2 missing college kids into angels. Officially, Adam and Serena would be 39 years old. I wasn't looking forward to trying to explain how the 2 of them resembled teenagers. Still, I sat in the back of the police cruiser, following a dozen cops to my house, which was empty. Mom and Dad were gone, and when the cops broke through into the attic, it was just storage space. The angels were nowhere to be seen. It didn't take the cops long to start pointing the finger at me. I was hauled back to the station, and after I was interrogated and then lectured on wasting police time, I was released. With no choice but to go home, I began my search. Jude and Lily had to be somewhere, hidden away. I couldn't imagine my parents running away with 2 genetically engineered angels. I started in the attic, where all I could find were old boxes, ancient toys, and a D's. Mom and Dad were good at covering their tracks. Moving to my parents' room, there was nothing of importance until I crawled under their bed. There was nothing under there, but there was a lump in the carpet, another loose floorboard. This one led me into a shallow hole filled with documents. Spreading them across the floor, I found Adam and Serena's names. Mom and Dad were documenting their progress. Day 1, subjects are calm, neuromuscular blockers administered. I am going to attempt to make an incision into the spine of the S1. I will update with progress. So far, everything looks good. There was 19 years worth of research and procedures, but they didn't stop after Adam and Serena. I found old files from years ago, back when they were babies. Names that kept going: Nathan, Lily, Charlotte, Matthew, Jesse, Victor, Evangeline. Something sickly crept its way up my throat. If my parents had been experimenting on all of those people, where were they now? I got my answer when I dug deeper into the old subjects. Failed was stamped, a sea of red. Reaching further into the shallow cavern, my fingers brushed something warm, something wet and soft, almost like feathers. I retracted back, and as if it was alive, as if it could feel, the ground rumbled beneath me, and I heard that soft cry once more. That wail. I couldn't stop myself. I jumped up, tearing at the walls of my parents' room, and stepping back. When paint became slick and wet, bloody feathers stuck to my palms. When a single eye blinked back at me, I stumbled back, my heart in my mouth. Mom was right, she was wrong. She lied about almost everything. Jude and Lily were not angels. They did not save me when I was a baby. Jude and Lily are my parents' successful attempt to replace what is living inside our walls. The angel my house was built on, its bones made from its foundations, its blood splattered across our walls. I think it's upset. I think it wants its children, all of its children, from past and present, back. It's already started to cry, the walls are bleeding, its ceiling is crumbling, floors caving in. The angel whispers in my ear, a language that twists and contorts my thoughts. This thing is threatening me. If I don't bring back its children, it's going to kill me. But I can't help wondering if it's trying to tell me something. Are those that failed still inside our house? I'm updating this post before I post the whole thing. Last night I couldn't sleep. I have been in agonizing pain for hours. Lightning bolts are running up and down my spine. I stuck my hand under my shirt to relieve the tension, only to pluck a single feather quill from my body. What my parents did to Jude, Lily, and all those kids. Am I their next subject?
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.